I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our guests that we have assembled in the council chambers tonight. Tonight is a work session, which is somewhat different than a typical city council meeting. I believe you have the agenda so you can follow along with us, and of course we have it up on the screen as well. First thing I'd like to do is get a motion to go ahead and approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion is carried. We're now going to move into our first major topic tonight, which is the 2040 Comprehensive Plan discussion. City Administrator approval.
Mayor Haig, members of the City Council, we are going to be just discussing the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. If you don't have a copy, there are copies available here. We ask if the public takes any, just return them. There is, I think we charge $40 per comprehensive plan if you want one. Otherwise, there's digital copies online as well. So the idea is that we'll just give an overview, kind of talk about the comprehensive plan, talk about the different priorities and strategies of the comprehensive plan, and then basically roll into planned unit development discussion and just kind of legal aspects of that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the 2019 budget. So hopefully we can get through this. I know it's a lot of items, and the intent is to kind of go through this and then have a question and answer session after each one. So if you have something, you can save it to the end. You can ask during the question or during the presentation, however you feel. It's very informal. So with that, I'll continue on, and basically an overview of just the comp plan discussion. We're going to go over the introduction, and basically that's going to include a lot of the executive summary. So in your comp plan in the beginning, I think on page 3 or 4, there's an executive summary that talks about a lot of the things that are listed in the comprehensive plan. We're going to go into detail about the different priorities and strategies and just kind of give an overview to make sure everybody knows what those are, and basically the 5 areas of 5 priority areas, we'll call them. Next, we're going to go into what the board and commission roles and responsibilities are, and we're going to really focus on the planning commission, the Economic Development Authority, CPAT. I'll talk a little bit about RPAC, and then just basically other boards and commissions. And then we're going to talk about what the format of the Future of the City Forum, which will be in March of 2019, and the format of the Downtown Master Plan Town Hall, which is on, should have confirmed this before I did this, September 19th at 6 p.m. at Valley Green Square Mall in the Valley Green Square room. Then we'll have a little question and answer session. So with that, we'll get started. So I've attached a copy of the resolution that basically authorized the comprehensive plan. If you look at the date on this, this was approved on October 24th, 2016. So our comprehensive plan, the 2040 comprehensive plan, is a little under 2 years old. Keep in mind that this is a 24-year plan if you go out to 2040. So we're at about 3.5% into the timeline of this document. Now, that's not to say that we have to follow it exactly to that manner, but just really keep in mind when we're talking about some of these big picture items that we do have time. We are planning. There's a lot of different steps that are involved with this. So, just to put that into context, where we're at when it was adopted, and just a little historical context. Previously to this, it was 1965. So we had a very old comp plan. I don't know how much it was utilized prior to this, but I'm guessing that the 1992 City Code, the zoning code that was adopted in 1992, superseded the comprehensive plan. So there's a lot of different moving parts here, but as you'll see in one of the slides, there's a matrix of basically all of our documents we have and how they tie to the 5 priority areas and how we kind of can utilize them. You'll see that there aren't many documents that are very old anymore, except for that city code aspect, which we're working on, that we should see some progress on this year. So looking at this, if you want to follow along on here, This is just the first page of the executive summary. In general, a comprehensive plan is a guide and a tool, so you use it for making decisions. I know our planning commission has went through planning training in Montgomery that showed them that the comprehensive plan, because we adopted our comprehensive plan, that supersedes any other planning document that we had because it's the most recent and it's a comprehensive plan. Now, there's a difference between our zoning ordinance and our comprehensive plan, and that's where we have to update our zoning ordinance, which is what we're working on right now. We hope that everything kind of will conform. A lot of times, comprehensive plan updates and zoning ordinance updates go hand in hand. We did the comprehensive plan, and now we're doing the zoning ordinance. You'll see on that matrix of documents sheet that there are basically some other documents that we want to attach to our comprehensive plan. Those documents will help us, help us make decisions in the future. So, being able to add things show that our comprehensive plan is a dynamic document. Community context, this is just part of the executive summary. I don't know if you want me to get into the details of this, but it's all in there. It kind of talks about what the community is comprised of, to give an idea of what our priorities may be. The vision of our community, I'll just read this. The city of Sueur in 2040 will be defined by its convenient location, its rural character, its ample opportunities, and its ability to evolve with the ever-changing world. But Lesueur's true essence lies in its vibrant community composed of people who are committed to making their cities thrive. So that's essentially the mission statement, the vision of our comprehensive plan. Looking at the 6 different areas, these kind of, symbols you'll see these on all of the goals, or you'll see a various combination of these on all of the goals that we'll go over. Basically healthy, friendly, responsive, dynamic, beautiful, and vibrant. So these things are linked to the goals and the strategies that we have. Looking at the master plan, so you look at a comprehensive plan, it is a plan, it's a planning document, it's a master plan, a long-term plan. There's a lot of different things in the comprehensive plan as far as goals and priorities. If there's anything that is specific that you want to talk about, as we get into some of these things, feel free to talk about them. But I think we've done a good job of really picking away at some of the strategies really early on. You'll see some of the stuff is related to capital planning, the downtown master plan, things like that. And we'll kind of go through the strategies and priorities and look at what we've already started, what we have planned, things like that. So the strategies that are outlined in the comprehensive plan, I'll just kind of read through them. Volunteerism and philanthropy, public-private partnerships, update official controls, so that's your ordinances, your zoning, your building codes, develop a capital improvement plan, downtown master plan, expanding commercial and industrial base, offer diverse range of housing options, outdoor recreation, and to conduct the Future of the City Forum. So looking at these, I think we've done a good job of getting a good start, being that we're less than 2 years in. A lot of these things, we've taken an initiative, we've prioritized as a city council and staff to get rolling early. Looking at some of the priorities that have been identified, number one thing was open Main Street and redevelop mall site. We're working on that. We've been working on it as part of the downtown master plan. We should see a resolve or just direction within a few months here, a couple months. So that's something that's on a top priority of our priority list. Downtown master plan, we've looked at that, we've completed that, we've adopted that. School and business partnerships. We currently have a partnership with the school district for community education services. We partner with them potentially on cable access television, where we're looking into that as well. Develop local trails, become a hub for regional trails, truck traffic planning, park at the yard waste site, Newell's favorite. Become a leader in sustainability and resilience. We have a couple things in the mix for that. When we look at the electric budget come October-ish, we're going to look at a possibility of potentially going 100% renewable with the energy that we purchase through MMPA, our energy provider. We'll look at that option. That really will help satisfy that need. Now, there's a cost to that, so we have to determine if that's a cost that we're willing to pay or that we're looking at, and see if it's worth it, because there's other things that we can do as well that might be less costly and more effective. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the electric budget through the budget process. The wayfinding plan and package. So in the budget for 2019 in the capital plan, there is a wayfinding signage line item in there to plan some of those things. I don't know if we'll exactly be able to do everything we want, but we'll at least be able to plan and purchase some signs, I believe, with what we've allocated. The Branded Technology and Innovation District, I know this is close to a lot of people's hearts that are on various boards and commissions and city council. So this is something that I think we have an opportunity. We have high-speed internet. We have access to those types of things. So, and then the Mayo Park Master Plan, that's one thing that's on here that I think that we have to talk about seriously because of just some things that are occurring with FEMA and the expansion of some of the floodplains that we're seeing. Right now, we're going through a process where FEMA's looking at expanding floodplains. And one of the areas that there is an expansion in is Mayo Park. So roughly, I'd say 35% of Mayo Park is currently in the 100-year floodplain. We saw flooding out at Mayo Park through June this year, and technically it'll expand to about 50% when FEMA adopts their floodplain mapping initiative that they're going through right now. So we'll have to look at that and see if that's a park that we can actively plan and use, or if there's something better out there that we could look at. So I'm just going to go through these goals and priorities fairly quickly. I'm not going to get into the policy section too much, but if you want to look through your comprehensive plan, you can look at this. I'm not sure what page is it, 32? 32 is what page this is on. So the goals, you'll see this first one is land use. That's kind of one of the first priority areas. So the first goal, L1, is to provide attractive, high-quality range of housing types and styles throughout the city in order to foster community pride without compromising opportunities for people of all life stages and income levels. So when you're looking at these goals, it's important to make sure that you're thinking of these in the context of all the different facets of the city. So one that's very recent is some housing. Apartment housing that we had a PUD application for. So looking at some of these things, just keep those in mind, but it's not entirely always related to the housing, but because it's recent, it's something that we can look at and compare. So moving on to L2, growth in general is the name of that goal. So establish redevelopment and future growth in a manner that reflects Sueur's historic context, provides a diversity of land uses, is cost-effective, enhances the vitality and attractiveness of the community, and maximizes accessibility to local destinations while respecting the natural environment. So it's just kind of these general goals. Goal L3, work, support a vibrant mix of local retail, office, and industrial services, and create an attractive environment for new business ventures that will diversify the tax and employment base. L3, work and prosper, support the development and attraction of quality labor force to meet existing business and industry needs, as well as sustain environment of growth. L5, prosper, reinforce the identity of downtown Sueur as a unique center for commerce, culture, and community gathering, and support redevelopment and revitalization efforts to forward this ideal. So you'll see a lot of these are tied directly to some of the priorities and strategies that we've kind of went through already. You'll see a general theme in our comprehensive plan. It's focused on our downtown area quite a bit, but there's also a lot of other things that are focused on. But I think the downtown master plan, I think it was identified as the second. Well, the two top priorities that were identified were in the downtown area. So it's it's not uncommon to see that as far as being a priority in a lot of these goals. Goal L6, conserve, preserve and protect Le Sueur's natural environment. Hold on, let me switch this. To improve ecological functioning, especially regarding the water and woodland resources surrounding the city. So we're looking at, right now I have a project, kind of speculative project, looking at some of our wastewater treatment ponds. You maybe have seen some bills that are coming through from WSB about that, but what we're evaluating is potentially enrolling our wastewater treatment plant ponds into a wetland banking system. So restoring them, getting them up to higher quality wetlands, and then we can go back and we can sell those wetland credits to developers that are disturbing wetlands. There's a pretty large profit margin if it is approved, but I don't know of any other community that's done this in the state of Minnesota to be able to take previously decommissioned wastewater treatment ponds, restore them, and receive wetland credits. So it's something new. We've done this before. I've done this before in another community. I've purchased wetland credits. It's a good thing. It can be a large revenue generator, and because it's our wastewater treatment ponds, those revenues could potentially go to help offset some of the wastewater treatment bond payments that we have. So we're working at a bunch of different ways. This is a nice example of how preserving woodland resources surrounding the city, wet water and woodland resources, can also be a benefit revenue-wise for the city. Going to the next priority is infrastructure. So we've done a lot. We've talked a lot about infrastructure recently at City Council. We've looked at things. We've adopted things such as the CIP. Just last night, the Pavement Management Plan 2018 update was adopted. So I'd say infrastructure is something that we focused on, and that might be a product of just my background, being able to move some of these things along, which is good because we definitely have some infrastructure needs in the community. I think last night was a good discussion about the Pavement Management Plan and how much money we should be allocating on average to our road maintenance, reconstruction, just maintenance stuff, compared to what we're actually investing. So I think it's a good discussion to have. And like I said last night, I don't think we'll ever have enough money to do everything we want. So there's going to be some tough decisions that will need to be made. So goal I1, in collaboration with respective agencies, so MRVPUC, MMPA, so those are our two wastewater entity and our electric entity, ensure Le Sueur's core infrastructure systems, so sanitary sewer, storm sewer, potable water, electricity, and telecommunications, meet the needs of current residences and businesses and facilitate future growth without compromising the quality of the natural environment. Infrastructure goal I2, provide safe and clean drinking water to the city of Le Sueur. Now, it's very broad, but it's very important, obviously. We take it very seriously. We have both DNR, Minnesota Department of Health, protocols that we have to follow and test our water. So, and we've done very well with it. We have a water treatment system that doesn't cost much to maintain. In the future, when there potentially are additional stipulations put on drinking water, there may be a need for an additional water treatment system, but that is so far in advance that you won't see that in even a 10-year CIP unless something dramatic happens. So that's very important. I think we're doing a good job of this one. That's monitored very closely. Goal I3, ensure reliable water supply to meet the demands of growth, the fire department, industry, and agriculture. So one of the items that you'll see and that we've talked about at personnel and budget is looking at a utility plan in 2019, looking at what utilities we need to have in certain locations of the city to provide water service to those areas based on the zoning. So looking at that, we don't really have a plan, and there's a lot of different things going on under our streets. A lot of, transitions from large water mains to smaller water mains and then back up to larger water mains. It's just making sure that we can identify those things and make sure that if we have a project in that area that we're fixing those. So we're going to be working on this one. I think we had some questions about this, about the PUD application as well. So I think anything that we can do to help give us some guiding documents to plan those things is something that we should focus on. Goal I4, safely and responsibly treat and discharge sewage. So this is tied directly to MRPUC, and MRPUC is an entity that manages our wastewater treatment services for Sueur and Henderson, and they've done a good job. We haven't had I think last year we had one duty officer report that we had to do. And it was very minimal. It was just a matter of us having to do it. There were no fines or anything of that nature. But we did have one thing that happened that was very small. But we are doing a good job. Our plan is operating very well. We have members on this council that are members of MRPUC. They can attest to it. Things are on track, and they're doing very well out there. The biggest problem is the financial responsibility of paying for the plant that we have. Infrastructure goal I5, ensure reliable wastewater collection and treatment to meet current and future demand. So this is also tied to the utility plan that I've alluded to before, making sure that we have good infrastructure in place, making sure that we're planning for future growth and that things are sized correctly. That infrastructure, that utility plan would help out with that quite a bit. Infrastructure goal I6, safely manage stormwater. So that's very vague, but we just established a stormwater ordinance effective January 1st, 2018. We have been gathering funds for that. Right now, we're in a pattern of collecting funds in anticipation of a large stormwater project for the 112 turnback. So after that, or even prior to that, if we have some major issues that we need to address, we will. But in the future, if we do future infrastructure projects, we now have a stormwater fund that we can utilize to pay for the stormwater aspects of projects, where we can manage our stormwater without affecting the general fund levy. So it'll give us more financial flexibility to do larger projects. So I think we're doing a good job of this one. Infrastructure, goal I7, prevent local erosion and flood damage. Now, this is something that is very current. Rich Kuchera and myself, Rich is the Public Services Director. We recently looked at some of the damage that occurred during the last flood that we had that ended around the end of June. Mayo Park had some major damage. This isn't the first time. I think this is the fourth time that we have submitted for some reimbursement from FEMA. Now, basically, the rule of thumb for those types of things is 3 strikes and you're out. So right now we have to come up with a mitigation plan for some of these areas. So looking at Mayo Park, looking at our compost site, looking at just areas that are flooded, looking at possibly mitigating those somehow. And what that means to mitigate is that, let's say, for example, at Mayo Park, we have Kentucky bluegrass planted there. Now that isn't a vegetation that can be flooded and still survive. A mitigation would be to plant some sort of vegetation in that area that could withstand and survive during flood events. Now that isn't something that we can necessarily use for active parks, but it's something that we can stabilize the area. We could potentially have some, let's say, paths through there, but it won't be your typical turf grass that you can mow every week and that nature. So there's things that we're looking at for this, but Sueur is a community that's lived along the river for its whole life. So a lot of the areas that have been developed are above that floodplain. So there isn't a lot of areas that we can mitigate, but we'll have to definitely look at some of the ones that we have that we can. Infrastructure goal I8, improve surface water quality. The city will work to reduce the impacts of runoff on water quality and damages to natural resources and environment. This is tied directly to our stormwater that we have in the program that we're essentially starting. Infrastructure goal I9, recycle household materials. We have a garbage contract that requires recycling or provides recycling bins, so we are meeting that one. Infrastructure goal I10, safely collect and dispose of waste. We have a contract with Waste Management. I11, provide safe, efficient energy to residents and businesses in Sueur. So we work with MMPA, Minnesota Municipal Power Agency, and They're one of the leading organizations in the state of Minnesota. I'm not sure nationwide as far as utilizing renewable resources to provide energy. So I would say we're definitely doing that in an efficient manner. And the trends nowadays are that renewable resources are really kind of cheaper than using some of the old traditional forms of energy production. So I'd say that the group that we're with, that we've partnered with, is ahead of the curve. So that's a good thing. Infrastructure goal I-12, expand internet access in 2 underserved areas around the city of Sueur. Honestly, this is something that we haven't looked at. This is something we should and we will. I know that we have multiple broadband providers in the community, and just looking at, I honestly haven't seen a utility map showing where they're at, where they're not, who's where. I generally know where they are, but it would be something that would help us plan accordingly. Infrastructure goal I-13, reduce emissions and costs by increasing energy production through renewable energy sources and reducing energy consumptions. We have a capital improvement plan, which is different than our capital improvement plan through the city, but it's through our electric department that basically offers rebates, incentives to transition from incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs, get Energy Star certified appliances, things like that. So we have ways that we're reducing our energy consumption. Again, we're with a group, MMPA, that's on the cutting edge of energy production in a renewable sense. So I think we're doing a very good job on I-13. So next, we're going to transition to transportation, and this is something that we've talked about most recently with this group. So looking at transportation, goal 1, manage access to the roadway network. So I'm not going to read the big verbiage about that, but basically we need to make sure that we're planning accordingly for the future growth areas in town, making sure that we're accommodating the businesses, the industry, and we're designing things correctly when we're doing new projects. So designing things to our typical road section, making sure that the road section is designed for the use that it's intended. Transportation goal 2, system connectivity. This is something that the transportation plan that is being proposed in 2019 will address. When I'm looking at a map, let's say I'm on Beacon and I'm connecting the dots and looking at the right-of-way that the city has, I get a general idea of what the transportation plan was or is, but there's nothing that's been formally adopted that I've found. Now, the idea would be that a transportation plan would be an amendment or an appendix to our comprehensive plan, and that transportation plan can then be used to help with the decision-making process that would potentially happen with any applications. Looking at T3, alternative mobility options. So Sueur's goal for mobility options is to offer a full range of travel modes as well as routes. We have a transit authority that we partner with St. Peter on. That seems to be working very well. The partnership is successful. They haven't had to come to either cities for any contributions fiscally, so they are self-sufficient, which is very good. That conversation is harder to have if they are coming back to the entities saying, "Man, we need some input from the general levy," but they're really growing, and I think they're doing a good job. So we have these mobility options. We have a major sidewalk project that's coming up next year that will help with ADA compliance. We're looking at making sure that when we do our road projects that we're all ADA compliant. We're required to do that, but as you walk around town, as I walk around town, you'll notice there are a lot of sidewalks that need repair. So we're going to be definitely looking at that. I know previous councils have really focused on sidewalks. We can definitely do that as well. I think that that's important. I think that we can pair that along with some road projects and really do a lot of good for the mobility options in the city. Transportation goal T4, roadway system that is safe. That is safe is of extreme importance for the health and well-being for a community. So Sueur's goal is to minimize traffic accidents and minimize property damage that result from unsafe roadway systems. So one thing you'll notice next year, we have some new staff, we have some new eyes that are looking at things. A lot of the road signs that we have in town need to be replaced. There's this thing called retroreflectivity that we're required to abide by. And basically that means that the sign is reflective at night. And all these signs are made by 3M. They have a 10-year basically warranty on the retro reflectivity guarantee on there. A lot of our signs are older than 10 years. So we're looking at going through a systematic approach to replace a lot of our signage. So that definitely is tied into the safety of our transportation. Transportation goal T5, funding of roadway improvements in a costly endeavor. Sueur's goal is to invest in the maintenance and reconstruction of the existing roadway infrastructure and to ensure that new road corridors and intersections are planned for both short-term and long-term needs. So this is really tied to transportation planning and our capital improvement planning. Goal T6, traveling through and within the community, whether on foot, bicycle, or vehicle, should be more than just moving from destination to destination. Sueur's goal for the transportation system is to ensure attractive and memorable street corridors. Now, this is something that's tied to a lot of different features that we've talked about. Wayfinding signage, a parks open space trail system master plan, things like that. It's about the experience, the walkability, the livability in a community, and making sure that the people that are living in here, living in the city, enjoy their experience when they're moving from park to park or park to home or home to business, things like that. So those are things that we definitely lack in, I'd say, at the moment, but we definitely have it on our radar. We have a new group, RPAC, that I could see them working on things like this very extensively. Looking at the next goal for parks, there is just one goal for parks, P1. Promote active living by improving the community's connections to natural areas and through the maintenance and expansion of an environmentally and economically sustained park, recreation, and trail system. So an exercise, one of the first exercises that staff plans to engage the RPAC in is developing a trail master plan. So I have experience in that. Rich Kachera has experience in that. That's something that we feel we can do internally, and that City Council will look at and eventually adopt. And this trail master plan, it could be adopted and included into the comprehensive plan as well. That's one thing that I'm just thinking about that I don't have in the little matrix of all the documents that we have that are in the future, but it's something that'll allow us to go after grants and opportunities. I know Councilmember Roloff brought up SHIP, looking at grants from them, grants from the state of Minnesota, the Minnesota DNR, and even federal grants for trails. There's a lot of money out there. We're in a particularly good place in Minnesota with Lessard Sam's legacy amendment. There's dollars available specifically for trail improvements. So that amendment, I believe, runs out in 2026, I believe, if I have my numbers right. So, now's the time to do it if we want to take it seriously, and we can help get cost share through grants. This is that sheet that I've kind of alluded to. I kind of put together just looking at. We have basically our core planning documents. We have our comprehensive plan, our city charter, and our city code. Those are the three things that we have to look at. And essentially the comprehensive plan supersedes a lot of the items in our city code related to zoning. The priority areas that are identified in our comprehensive plan: housing, land use, infrastructure, transportation, and parks. You'll see that we have a lot of documents, guiding documents, policy documents that are associated with this. And the idea, this is just something I threw together today, the idea is that we'll have something nice on the website that we can go through, look at it in this manner, and if somebody wants to go on and click on any one of these, let's say, icons for the 2014 housing study, they can click on it, they can look at that document. And the other idea is that eventually we'll have documents that we want to include into the comprehensive plan, and whenever we update that, then that major comprehensive plan link online will get updated to include all of those items. And the actual comprehensive plan will change too. For example, if we have a zoning code update, which we're working on right now, and we want to adopt that. There would be reference in our comprehensive plan that we would change to basically incorporate that zoning update. The areas that you see in yellow are future items that are included in the budget for next year. The one that isn't really included, but I think we can partner with the transportation and utility plan, is the priority growth area plan. So looking at our current corporate limits and looking at where our areas of growth will be. That's important because we need to make sure that if we have areas of growth, we're putting the right size and type of utilities in those areas to make sure that we can serve those based on what the community need is. Looking at that, the transportation plan you'll see is referenced numerous times in here. The one thing that you'll see is referenced on all 5 of the priority areas is the downtown master plan. So that area touches a lot of the different priorities in the comprehensive plan. So that's a very good document to have and to reference. The one thing that I think we'll do if we do get these transportation plan, utility plan, things like that passed and adopted next year, we'll go through a process of actually including the downtown master plan as an appendix in the comprehensive plan. That way, when we're looking at it, we have a comprehensive view, and it's one of the major items that were identified as far as what we want to do. So it's a major component of the comprehensive plan. So next, I'll transition into just the board and commission roles and responsibilities. So we're going to really focus on the Planning Commission, the Economic Development Authority, Comprehensive Plan Action Team, RPAC, and then all the other various boards and commissions. I think we have around 15 groups that are organized within the city, either committees, action teams, things like that. So there's a lot of people that are involved in the decision-making process. So looking at what the Planning Commission role is. So the Planning Commission, they review applications and determine conformance with the comprehensive plan, zoning code, city code, charter, and other adopted planning documents. So looking at all of the documents in that document matrix, they're looking at everything. So the Planning Commission has a very comprehensive role in having to know a lot about what's going on in the community and all the planning documents. The one thing that we have going for us is that most of our documents are fairly updated. The only one that we're working on it is the zoning code. Our charter, we've gone through an extensive process to update our charter and make sure that that's relevant and up to date in conformance with state statute. Our comprehensive plan is fairly new, or very new, I would say. And all the other documents that are associated with it are also fairly new. So once we get that kind of missing component, if you go back and look at this, you'll look, well, everything's pretty updated except for that zoning code from 1992. Eventually that one will be gone, and that'll be superseded with that 2018 zoning code, which will also blend very well with our comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission also provides recommendations to City Council for future action. They do the technical review to help the City Council make a responsible decision. They cannot bring personal bias into their recommendations, and the recommendations must relate to existing code policies and guiding documents. We'll get more involved with what the Planning Commission does as far as, in particular, with the planned unit development process when I kick this over to Sam and Nate and Todd. But yeah, they're really just using the documents, making sure that the items that are being applied for and meet those guiding documents. We'll go to the Economic Development Authority. So the Economic Development Authority helps facilitate strategic and priority areas associated with the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Downtown Master Plan. So it's important that these groups have these planning documents available to them, and they do. I know that they've looked at them. The EDA also has a unique ability to combine and utilize the HRA, EDA, and city powers. So that's something that the EDA is very active in. They're very active in housing. You don't really think about that. That the EDA is actually the entity that's doing a lot of our housing programs that we have. You look at some of the SAC and WAC programs that we have. They're the initiative behind that, and they in their guiding documents or authorizing resolution, they're given the powers of the HRA. The EDA is allowed to buy and sell property, make loans and grants to businesses, provide guarantees and other credit enhancements, and they can sell bonds. That came up last night at the EDA meeting, talking about a bond disbursement that they have for development that I believe was in 2008. I believe it was Park Knowles. So, they have that power. I'm not sure, so the city can also sell bonds, but the EDA kind of can act as a facilitator for some of these other larger kind of housing and development type projects. So, and the EDA also serves to promote business and recruit new businesses. Looking at the comprehensive plan action team. So this is something that Councilmember Johnson really spearheaded when the comprehensive plan was adopted in 2016. And the question that was posed was, how do we make sure that we keep this very important document relevant? The idea came up with a comprehensive plan action team to make sure that group really focuses on providing priority guidance to the city council related to projects and initiatives related to the strategies and priorities identified in the 2040 comprehensive plan. Essentially, they're looking at what the city's doing at a 50,000 foot level and say, are the things that are prioritized for the city, are they related to the 2040 comprehensive plan? Are they not? What should they be doing? Should we be focusing on other areas? Also, the CPAT group facilitates the Future of the City Forum, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee, same general ideas, that they're providing guidance to City Council for that, basically that parks related priority. So looking at the parks related priority, making sure that the city is planning accordingly to that in the comprehensive plan. And same with all the other boards and commissions. I just put this in here because they're also doing that. They have the ability to give city council feedback. If there's something that's occurring or something that we're missing, those other boards and commissions, they have every right to either give feedback to city council via me, via city council members, or they could potentially petition the city council to have them present at a meeting. So we have a lot of different groups and a lot of people that are involved, and it's good. And the idea is that they're really focusing on using the comprehensive plan to guide the direction the city's going. Action plans and takeaways. So basically, again, I'll reiterate, they should all be aware of the 2040 comprehensive plan. As staff, we're going to make sure that every group has all of these documents. I think having all of these in one kind of central repository will help. And hopefully some of the individuals on council that have that institutional knowledge, like Councilmember Johnson, we can make sure that everything is captured, because again, with staff turnover, some of these things can be easily missed, stored somewhere on a server somewhere, and we're not seeing it. So any information that's been out there that we've talked about, we want to make sure that the hard work that those groups went through to get things adopted and planned, that we're not forgetting about it. So the action plan, so talking about that, so each major group within the city, Planning Commission, EDA, City Council, CPAT. Is there anybody else, Sam, that I'm missing that has an action plan? The Planning Commission. They all have action plans that are associated with the comprehensive plan. Now, one thing that we didn't do at the City Council retreat that we had last year was incorporate that action plan into that priority planning exercise, which it turns out that we planned accordingly. There's some items that we planned for, but not everything. So that's something that we'll reevaluate this year. And if we want to amend our action plan that we have here at City Council, we can. But I want to make sure that gets incorporated into the retreat discussion that we have in January or February, to make sure that our action plan is incorporated into our council priorities that you see on the wall behind you. So I'll move on to the Future of the City Forum. So this comprehensive plan thing is going to wrap up here soon. So thanks everybody for hanging in there. So this event will be held in March of 2019. So the location, date, time exactly have not been done yet, but there will be a State of the City speech that will be made by the mayor. I kind of planted the seed last night a little bit, and yeah, it'll be good. I mean, because the timing of this is not by accident. So the idea is that we'll have a good time in March. That'll be after we have our planning exercise, our retreat for city council. We'll be able to look at 2018 as a whole and see where we're at. We'll be able to compare the priorities that we identified early in 2018, see if we made those priorities, and we'll talk about it. We'll just have a forum that we can talk about what we've done and where we're going. So I think the areas that we'll talk about are the areas identified as strategies: the volunteerism, the partnerships, the official controls, capital improvement plans, the downtown master plan, economic development and housing, and parks and trails. So it'll be a good event, and I hope that we can get as many people there as possible, because the idea is that we'll hold this every year, and I think March would be a great time to do it. It's kind of the in-between time between winter and spring, and then we can also it pairs up well with our retreat. So a more recent, or a more timely event is the downtown master plan town hall. So this is going to be on September 19th at 6 p.m. at Valley Green Square Mall in the Valley Green room. We're going to really focus on looking at the downtown master plan. We'll hope to update as much as we can about the Main Street discussion that we're having with MnDOT. We might not be able to have all the information by then, but we'll have a good idea of what direction we're going, I hope. There'll be an open forum, a question and answer session with the public, and we're going to make sure that we invite all the various boards and commissions that the city has, make sure that they're invited, and we hope that they can attend. So, with that, my spiel is over. Are there questions that you have about the comprehensive plan, how we want to use it in our daily planning, annual planning, whatever we're doing? Anything, any specifics that you have anything about, or just general discussion? With that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Council members, any questions? Council member Favelis.
We're talking about broadband connectivity as part of this. I think one of the key things to look at is through either EDA or some other way, connectivity with high-speed internet, which is now classified at 60 meg per minute or higher, is now in our city is sparser than what most people would think. You have Mediacom, which is pretty much throughout, but then your Jaguar and I forgot what the other one is. Consolidated Communications. Well, I can say that I've had to look through that on 3 different pieces of property, and all 3 pieces of property, you're looking at a 3-year cost of anywhere from $300 to $400 to get it to your property, additional to what your regular high-speed internet would be if that's what you're looking for. Even at 1,000 feet away, I was still looking at about a $300 cost per payment on top of high speed. So covering those costs, if we're looking at making sure that everybody has that for connectivity, you're relying right now just on one provider that is able to produce that.
A lot of cities, what they end up doing, and they partner or they do their own broadband, and they can monitor that if they want. I don't think that we're in a situation where we would want to start from scratch, but a lot of broadband networks are city owned. We do have a resource in what I would call Jaguar, providing fiber service to businesses and things like that. So it would be something that we could partner with, to look at if that's something, a priority area that we want to look at.
This is up near Park Elementary, and Jaguar was the $300 a month. So again, that's 1,000 feet away from where the building would be to even try to get it to. And I wouldn't be the only one that would be looking for the same thing. Another question was, with the recycling, who we partner with for recycling, it's actually rather limited for recycling. And I know that there's an awful lot of other communities that, I don't know, you order things from Amazon and it comes packed full of styrofoam, but they don't recycle the styrofoam. I'm getting tired of taking the stuff that you throw it in the trash can knowing that it's not being recycled, and it can be recycled.
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. So our refuse contract with Waste Management, I think, has 3.5 years left on it. A lot of things that you'll see, there's a lot of things going on in the world economy that recycling is going to change quite a bit here, I think, in the next 5 years. But what you're seeing a lot of is organic wet waste recycling is also an option. So that gives you an option to do some things. So maybe some of those packing peanuts are compostable. They're not necessarily recyclable, but you can get rid of them. That's something that we could look at in our next contract that we have. Essentially we'll go out for an RFP again for refuse services. We can identify all the different things that we want in that. So if it's single sort recycling, that includes a bunch of different things that aren't included in what we have right now. That's something that we can request. But keep in mind that as you add these things, the service gets more expensive as well. So there's options out there. We're basically in the middle of a 7-year contract right now.
Did you have anything else, Councilmember Favalis?
I guess I'll build on things as other people have questions.
Okay. Who wants to go next? Well, I'll go ahead and bring up a couple of things then while you guys are gathering your thoughts. In 2016, when we adopted the comprehensive plan, we now know, 2 years removed, that there's a couple of pieces that are rather critical that are missing from that document. That would be the utility plan and the transportation plan. How did something like that happen? And is there any idea what it's going to cost through the RFP process to go ahead and take care of these now most critical items that we need to use to augment our comp plan?
Yeah, I can answer that, and I could ask Nate too, because I think Nate was part of the process as well. There's transportation components, there's utility components in our comprehensive plan, but there's nothing of detail. Looking at that, I've reached out to Nate to ask him, well, what does a transportation plan cost? Well, you want to make sure you have a good one, so it's making sure you have a good RFP, and you interview the people that you want to potentially have work on it. But you can spend anywhere from $25,000 to $45,000 plus on a transportation plan. We're hoping that we have a lot of the work done for it. I'm optimistic that we can get somebody in to do a good transportation plan and a utility plan for less than that. But we'll just have to see what the market drives and adapt to that. But planning wise, it would be great to have something. I don't think the city has had anything like this. Nate, you could maybe chime in. I don't know if we've had a transportation plan since you've worked for the city. Looking back to the 1965 comprehensive plan, I don't think there really is anything. We have remnants. We have right of way that the city owns that can kind of connect the dots, but it would be just a great planning document, especially if we have more opportunities that come up that we're having to evaluate things.
Before, Nate, you respond, perhaps another question. Do we have a cost for the utility plan? Is that going to also be somewhere between 25 and 45K as well, or is that included with the transportation plan?
I'm not sure exactly. So I think in the capital plan that we have for next year, I think we've identified about $45,000 for transportation and utility plan.
Combined.
Yeah, and we'll evaluate it. We'll have to see what we get back for proposals. We'll let them know what our range is. But like with our zoning update, we let them know what our basic range was. Some of the bigger firms said, well, we can't do that for that amount of money. They have set amounts and billings that they need to do. So we'll see what we can do, and we might have to adapt. But I'm fairly confident we can get this done in 2019.
Thank you. Next. Councilmember Huntington.
If you can, Jasper, just explain that renewable, coming in 100% renewable, that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat idea, I think. I've been kind of talking to MMPA about it for a little bit over a year, and it really just stems from the comprehensive plan and looking at, well, do we want to get into doing renewable, like actual physical infrastructure, solar panels, turbines, things like that? Or do we want to look at what it would cost? What we would do is buy renewable energy credits through what's the Mayo market. And we would be able to buy those 4 years out. So we could lock in a pretty good price for 4 years. And what we would do is we would be able to roll that every year and have the option to renew it every year based on what those costs are. So we'd have at least 4 years of 100% renewable energy. The biggest thing is, well, how much does this cost compared to what we currently pay right now? Working with MMPA, that would roughly be about 1% more per month for us to say that we're 100% renewable. This also stems from, there's a couple programs out there, Clean Energy Choice for residents and Clean Energy Choice for businesses. Basically, they have the option, so the same process where a business can say, well, I want to be 100% renewable. Those renewable energy credits will be purchased on their behalf. Their business can then get some stickers and some marketing materials and say, yep, I'm 100% renewable. They can start putting that on their website. The idea is that, hey, we can do that as a whole city for a very reduced cost compared to, let's say, if everybody in the city did this based on the program parameters right now, because there's a markup for administration for this that MMPA does. That markup basically goes away. So basically 1%, the long story short, is about $6,600 a month is what this would cost. So, the idea is that we have to talk to some of the businesses in town and see if this is worth it to them, if this is something that they can use. Residential, it's more of it's a feel good type program, but businesses, they might be able to market it. They might be able to, sell an RFP that they're, 100% renewable, and that might be the item that makes them more desirable than another business. So we're going to have to do some legwork to see if we can do that. It's a policy decision with the city council. We'd enter into a 4-year agreement, and then every year during the budgeting process, we would see, well, what are the next year's renewable energy credits going to cost, and then we can look at it in that manner. But it really is tied directly into our comprehensive plan, and it's I shouldn't say like quick and easy way of meeting that requirement. But it's something that we can do, and it's fairly inexpensive, especially when you look at what, if we were to install our own solar installation, put up more wind turbines, things like that, that would be able to get the city to 100% renewable status. So it's something that we'll look at. I'm not 100% sold on it myself personally, but I want to get more information from the area businesses to see if they can actually use it, and it'll be beneficial to them. Also, making sure that the residents are on board. We do have, I want to say, I can't remember, a small percentage of residential individuals that are already enrolled in this program. So basically, whatever they contribute, if it's $2 or $3 or whatever it is, I don't know the exact numbers, that would go away, and this would just be incorporated into the general energy bill.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to go ahead and close out then on the comprehensive plan discussion. Anybody want to make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. We now moved on to our planned unit development process discussion.
Mayor Hague, members of the City Council, we're going to just go through the process. And in our city code, there's a very well-defined process for this type of review. And I just want to make sure that this group is aware of it. A lot of these slides you'll see, you've maybe seen before at the Planning Commission meeting, but just, there's a lot of information in your packets, and I see some of you thumbing through it, but there's a lot of information. The intent is that you don't look at this and memorize this all tonight, but you have it with you, so if you're having trouble sleeping at night one time, you can pull out your planning, PUD, comp plan stuff, and you can look at it and go through it. But there's a very defined process. It's very meaty, I would say, the planned unit development review process. So I'll turn it over to Sam, and I'll just let Sam will take the lead on most of these, and then if we start looking at some of the legal ramifications or if there's legal questions that arise from the group, I'll defer those to Nate and Todd. They're very good at what they do. So I'll turn that over to Sam.
Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Jasper. Good evening, Mayor Hague, members of the council. You are able to follow along on the screen, but as Jasper said, in your packet of information, you should have Chapter 153. If you open up Chapter 153, it starts at the bottom of page 26 and goes to the top of page 27. So I'll talk briefly about the slides, but I want to make sure that you know where the information is in code in case you have any questions in the future. Does everyone find that?
Last thing in the packet.
Yep, so if you go to Chapter 153, page 27.
Page 27, you said?
Yes, sir. So what is a PUD? A PUD is a means to permit multiple structures on one lot and modify performance standards. So our zoning code permits a PUD as a conditional use permit. So I've kind of highlighted some of these terms because as you start talking PUDs and CUPs, it can get a little bit confusing. But basically, a conditional use permit allows you to have a planned unit development. And so this is a way for us to be able to do something that might not typically be mixed together as a development. And so if you look at what a PUD is, it's important to know, though, that even if you issue a PUD, you still have to meet what is the underlying district. So if it is a commercial district, you're granting a CUP and a PUD, you still have to meet whatever the underlying district is. So I hope that everyone understands that underlying district never goes away. If you wanted to change that, that's a different portion of an application. And so the PUD can be required if it is maybe a reduction in setback. So let's say I'm a housing developer, I come in, I want all of my houses in this development to have a reduced setback. That's something that could be issued with a PUD. Maybe smaller lot sizes, multiple structures on one lot, private streets or mixed uses in order to achieve better land than what would otherwise occur. So better use of the land and the natural resources. So as I said, any PUD needs to be evaluated and found consistent with the underlying zone, but also with the purpose statements. And so I'm not going to read these, but as you can see, there's quite a few purpose statements that are defined on page 27. And so it talks about make sure that it's a well-planned area. The concentration of open space has more usable areas and preservation of natural resources. To facilitate economic development, to allow construction of dwelling units in detached, clustered, or semi-detached. So you'll see that often in metro areas, maybe where they'll have townhomes mixed with apartments, mixed with small little single-family homes. That's often why someone would use a PUD. Another example of a PUD would be St. Francis Hospital. They have a mix of different buildings on one parcel of land, but they're all owned by St. Francis. So hopefully that's an example that makes sense to you. So conditional use permit, as I said, is required. So a CUP allows a city to consider uses which may be essential or desirable, but which are not allowed as a matter of right within a zoning district. And so you have to go through a public hearing process to consider a CUP. And so in there, it also goes through the different procedure, but it also talks on page 27, what's required of a conditional use permit. So in order to issue a conditional use permit, you have to find that it satisfies all the requirements in our code. And so as Jasper said, this code was done in 1992. I think it's important to know that maybe some things that were done with developments at that time maybe are a little bit different today. So that's why it's especially important that we look at our at our zoning code and update it with how things are being built, maybe smaller house sizes, bigger house sizes. In some cases, I joke about people wanting, bigger than a 3-car garage. I think years ago, if you would ask that, they were like, why would you need that? But then in the future, we all, be sharing automobiles? Will Uber be the way of the future? But I think that's why it's important to always look at our zoning codes and make sure that they're up to date. So if you talk about the conditions of the CUP, we can go through some of them. That it will not create an excessive burden on our parks and schools and other facilities, that it's reasonably related to the overall needs of our community, that it's effective and unified treatment of the development possibilities on the project site, and that the plans provide a preservation of unique natural amenities such as streams, banks, wooded areas. The uses will not have an undue or adverse impact on surrounding enjoyment of neighborhood property and will not be detrimental to surrounding areas. So if you go to the next page, these are more. So as you can see, this is extremely lengthy, the issues that go along with a PUD. It's very important that if they don't meet these, if there's an issue, that basically someone would not be granted a PUD. So a minimum of 2 or more separately owned units in at least one principal structure is proposed. The planned unit development can be planned and developed to harmonize with an existing or proposed development. Each phase of construction development is sufficient size, composition, and arrangement so that construction, marketing, and operation are feasible as to complete units, and that provisions for and construction of dwelling units and common space are balanced and coordinated. Make sure that financing is available to the applicant. So we don't want to have an applicant come through and go through a rezoning and then find out that they don't have the finances to pay for what needs to be done. And the entire planned unit development will be fully platted in final form within 5 years. So if we were to approve a PUD that we're saying, hey, within 5 years, you're going to come back and go through all of our processes. If not, then this is null and void. So if someone comes forward with a PUD and then never builds it, we're not guaranteeing in the future that that's going to stay with the land. Jessica, could you hit one more slide, please? Oops, sorry. I think it's interesting to note, too, that often people are curious about how this process works, and I know that there was some surveying being done on some land, and I think people were curious, is this something that the city is doing? But really, this is a private, in many cases, private developers who are looking for their own prospect. And so it isn't really something that comes to us until we have an application. And so often there's people looking at, maybe I should buy this house, or maybe I should buy this apartment, or maybe I should buy the entire mall. That happens all the time. But I think the important thing is, until city staff get something that we can actually react to, that's what starts our process, is once we have an application in hand. If they don't pay us the application dues, if they don't complete a full application, then we don't consider it. And so our job as someone who gets it is kind of that go-between to make sure that the person who's selling their land and the person who's buying it, that they're following our standards. And so we do that by going through the comprehensive plan. We look at our zoning code. We have a development review committee here that actually meets with developers when they come in to make sure that the water, the fire, the zoning, that everything is adequate for a development. So we also have a public hearing process that goes along with this. And so as you go through this, you'll actually see the procedures on page 28. And this goes from page 28 all the way back to 30. So this is a very in-depth procedure that has to be followed.
Just for the record, there's no page numbers in our document, but
you don't see them
it's
at the
about
bottom?
the middle of the book. It should be
sorry.
153.082 if anybody's having a hard time finding it.
Sorry, yep, 153.082.
Yep.
And so I think the next thing that is nice to have Todd here tonight and Nate here tonight is to talk about, well, when would findings be inadequate? So if someone comes to us with an application, or it goes to the planning commission then for review after staff has looked at it, staff saying, yes, we think that you now meet everything that we're asking, it goes to the planning commission. What does the planning commission then do, to look at it to make sure that beyond what we've looked at as staff, that it fits the boundaries of the law? So I'll turn that over then to Todd and Nate for that.
Just one quick question, just to make sure that I understand. Until an application's actually submitted and the check is in the hand of somebody within the city, there is no involvement from anybody within the city, correct?
I get calls from people wondering about things, but that is almost the extent of it. These are private transactions between.
But it all begins with the application and the
It
check.
all becomes with the application and the check.
Thank you.
Because as I said, I do get lots of different calls from people, and you often wonder what's going to happen with those people. Are they going to buy that house? Are they going to, is this actually going to happen? But those are the first steps of them actually making that commitment, is completing the application, submitting funds to the city.
If I may, we may get an application, and that application may be incomplete, and we'll help them complete their application. As you can see, it's a pretty extensive process, and for somebody that comes in and they're not familiar with the community, they're going to need some assistance. So as long as they give us I don't even know what the fee is for a PUD application, if it's $3,000 or if it's...
It depends on what goes along with
Okay.
it. Sometimes they'll apply for a PUD with, at the same time as maybe a plat or a preliminary plat or a final plat. It just depends. And every lot is going to be different. And that's what I think is a little bit interesting about it is I wish that I could tell you that there's going to be one process for every single person, but it may be different depending on what the land is zoned, what they want to do with the property. I even get calls sometimes from people who maybe buy the lot next door and think, well, I can put a garage on that lot because I bought it, but it doesn't work that way. Our zoning code doesn't allow for those things to happen. So it's really important that they do reach out to city, before they buy something. So sometimes, they'll call me and ask me some questions, but really it's up to them to do their due diligence as well and to make sure that what they're proposing meets our code.
Councilmember Sullivan.
Sam, can you discuss the Development Review Committee a little more? I guess I'm confused by that because that's not a committee that I've heard before.
And it's really an internal committee of city staff. So when we have someone come in, we've started looking at their application, we have more questions for them, we'll have them come in and ask them, do you also then have a utility plan? Are you going to sprinkle this building? If you're not, and it would be for a larger project, I would say. So especially in some cases, we need to call Owen in, who's our city engineer, to say, is this road actually feasible? Or, some of the new lots that have been developed, talking about where's that water and sewer connection, and people want to know, well, what is the cost of me connecting to water and sewer? Where are the water and sewer lines? Sometimes I can answer that, but sometimes they need to have Owen in-house to make sure that he's there helping them with the process, answering their questions. Nate's joined us on the phone. I hope that Nate can join us more in person because these are hard things for the public to understand, and they don't do it every single day. And if you do it maybe in one city and then come to another city, I hear that all the time. Well, if I was in Scott County, I could do this. And I'm like, well, we're now in Sueur County and it's different. And so that's hard for some people who maybe lived somewhere their whole life and were able to do something, or even living in Ottawa Township, coming into city proper now has different rules and regulations. And so I think it's important to note that, this happens very often, that we need to meet with them and work with them. And that is not open to the public. Those meetings are internal meetings with us and the applicant, prior to them paying the check, to make sure, is this really, I don't want someone to pay the money to us and have us say, well, this doesn't meet what we need. And that isn't very development friendly. So we want to make sure that they can come in and ask their questions in advance.
And to be clear, when you use the word us, you're talking about city staff.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
So just to piggyback on Marvin's question, and your statement that the first time there's city involvement is after receiving an application. So the Development Review Committee, which works with bigger projects, doesn't do anything until the application is received?
Sometimes they'll have some general questions and I'll have them answered, but it's really important that we all look at it kind of as a group to make sure that it makes sense. Sometimes if I have Owen look at it, he has a different perspective than Nate does. And so it's nice to have everybody at the same table at the same time saying, have you considered this? Have you thought about this? Could you move your road over? Could you connect the sewer here instead? It's kind of a nice way to bring everyone together to answer their questions all in one room, instead of handing them a sheet of paper, everyone's phone numbers, and saying, you can contact each person directly. It's just a nice customer service way to say, come in and talk to us. We're all here. We're willing to meet with you. Especially if we had a large company that, say, Cambria wanted to do a big expansion, we would have them come in advance and talk about this, because as they're working with engineers and designers, we want to make sure that they have this information up front. It's very expensive to do site plans. It's very expensive to do, different things like that. So we want to make sure that the best information that we can give them, they have when they need it. But sometimes, if they're not further enough along in the process, then they have to do a little bit more of that legwork themselves.
As they put the application together?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so there is contact, there is interaction that occurs to help a developer or a business or an individual put their application together?
There is, and I think some of it is just, a lot of times they've already gone online and looked at our city code, which is interesting. Having our code online is really a huge tool that a lot of people use in advance. So they know before they come here if what they're wanting to do is allowed or not. And so they can see it by looking online.
But again, to be clear, this still has not received any attention by anybody outside of city staff.
Exactly. And like I said, that sometimes they look at something and they get far enough into the code and realize what they want to do, they can't even do here. So they move on. So sometimes I don't even know that people are looking when they're looking.
So where's the magic point where the public gets included or clued into what's going on?
So once they've actually submitted an application, that's when it becomes public data.
And the 60 days begins.
And the 60-day clock begins.
I want to just clarify, once that application is considered complete.
Yeah.
So they might submit an application, give us the check, and that application isn't complete until they meet all the stipulations. They review it, or it's reviewed by the Development Review Committee. So once that application is complete and we say, yes, it's complete, that's when that 60-day is triggered. So leading up to that, there might be a lot of questions that staff has to answer through the development review process. But that 60-day notice or the 60-day time frame that's identified in our city code, that's triggered once we determine that the application is complete. And that's when we can technically cash that check.
At some point tonight, we're going to be going through the 60-day window so we all understand what occurs at what point within the 60-day time frame.
Also,
Mr. Mayor, if Nate's going to speak, we need to get him a microphone.
But that's going to be taken care of. We're going to go through the 60-day window so everybody understands what happens exactly at what point, how it gets passed to planning and zoning, what they're responsible to do, and then how it goes to city council. We're going to go through the
We can talk about that,
Perfect.
definitely. Yep.
to be clear, you can't stop a person from putting in an application for a permit. They could design whatever it is that they want to design under any circumstance, whether or not it would conform to our code or not, and take a crapshoot as to whether or not it would go through the planning, zoning, and all the way through. They can spend whatever money they want, no matter what those concepts are, and present it to our city at any time of their liking. You can't deny them the opportunity to put a permit in under any circumstance. It just has to go through the same process.
So what happens if by chance the city was to go through and the 60 days elapses and we haven't done the process complete on our side? Does the potential developer automatically have the access to that property then, or how does this work?
I believe we can do one 60-day extension past that. But after that, then yes, if we have dropped the ball, then basically after that 120 days, then it's automatically approved.
One more question.
Councilmember
So
Sullivan.
back to my initial question about the Development Review Committee, just to be clear, that's just a generic overview to see if they would even fit into, if it would be feasible for them to even design a project in an area that they're proposing.
Exactly. And I think is what, as Councilmember Favli said, if they want to go forward and never meet with us and design the entire thing, they can sure do that. I'm sure that we've all seen projects that someone has done that where I had no idea they were coming until they were at a certain point and they had specs and plans and, but that's the good and the bad of having our information online now, is so many people can actually go through an entire process without having any interaction with us at all.
Unfortunately, this is something that I see on a regular basis throughout the country. So that was where I was kind of going with that. And I've seen that happen in particular developments by the owner of the development. They went through and did all of the plans and designs to be able to go into that, only to find out that the business that actually owned it wouldn't allow that business to go in there. So I see this on a regular basis, but I had another one there. Also, this is the same for a CUP as it is for a PUD, right? You still have that 60-day opportunity. I went through that in the city here. It went through planning and zoning without a recommendation, was kicked up to city council, who kicked it back down and said, you're going to give us a recommendation.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's important to note that that's why it's really important that city staff, before we accept it, that we make sure it is complete. So if someone is missing some vital information that we can't make that decision, I don't want them to assume that the clock has started. We have to send them a letter saying your application is not complete because it is missing the following information. You want to make sure that whether it's a building permit, a fence permit, we have timelines for all of our permits, that we have a certain amount of time that we need to react to those by. And that's in consideration of the public, because they, time is money for a lot of these developers and the public themselves. And so we don't ever want to hold someone's new house construction or, even a fence. If there's a fence to be built, I want to make sure that we're reviewing their application within the right amount of days and getting back to them.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions regarding PUDs or CUPs? If not, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Nate Sparks then. Nate? Will you please use your microphone, sir?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, or good evening,
Welcome, Nate.
honorable members of the council. In this discussion about planned unit developments and whatnot, I believe you all have this Planning and Zoning 101. On the last page of that is kind of an important diagram, which is called the Pyramid of Discretion. Now, the Pyramid of Discretion shows that there's really 3 levels of discretion that the city council has when it comes to planning and zoning related requests. Where you have the least amount of discretion is like a building permit, where you're just confirming through city staff on whether or not it meets code. Then there's a little bit of discretion allowed where you're then talking about variances, CUPs, and subdivision applications, where you'll have like a public hearing, you'll have the planning commission making recommendations, but then you'll have like criteria in your code that you're basing your findings on. So you have some discretion, but not full discretion. Then as you get into like your zoning ordinance, your subdivision ordinance, and your comprehensive plan, you have the most discretion. And so what that means is you can't just deny a CUP out of hand just because you don't like it. You have to have a discussion that's based on your findings that are in your code. So just one thought, and we'll be talking with the Planning Commission about this, is that with planned unit developments, most cities these days have moved that from the some discretion into the more discretion category by requiring it to become like its own customized zoning district rather than a conditional use permit. So that means if you don't like what they're proposing as a PUD, you're not obligated to use your CUP review criteria. You can just use more discretion on that. And that becomes helpful if the proposed project is not very good, but somebody can make an argument that it technically meets the CUP criteria. So that's something we can discuss further down the road. But like you might ask yourself, why would a city want to do a PUD? Well, when we were talking about the comprehensive plan, at one point there was a policy up there that talked about incorporating conservation areas into subdivisions, for example. Now, a common PUD would be that, hey, I've got this great woodland here on my property. How about I go ahead and save that area from development? But then that's going to make all my lots, I'm not going to get as many lots as I would have otherwise, so I can't cash flow the project in the developer's mind. So you give them like a smaller minimum lot size than they would have otherwise got. So a trade-off like that would make a good common PUD. Another common PUD would be like the one that this INH Homes applied for, where they've got 2 apartment buildings and they're going to own them both and they want to put them on one lot. That's a simple PUD as well. So things like that are something you should think about in terms of PUDs in general. But now, when we're talking about the 60-day rule, as Sam was mentioning, you can deem an application incomplete before your clock starts ticking, but you have 15 business days to do that. So what happens is within that first 15 days, city staff looks at an application. Years ago, the city made checklists based on application requirements. You just look to see if it meets those. If it doesn't, you send it back to the applicant and you say, this isn't complete. You're missing these items, and they can then supplement their application with those items. But once an application's complete, if it's a zoning-related application, you've got 60 days to render judgment, which can be extended 60 days. It cannot be extended past that 60 days without the consent of the applicant. So I believe, like the assisted living facility, the applicant he extended it past the 120 because we were still dealing with some issues on that one back when that went through. But so for the 60-day rule, though, that doesn't apply to subdivisions. So if you had somebody applying for a subdivision, there's different sets of time frames for those, and there is no 15-day minimum, a business, 15-day business, 15 business days to deem it incomplete. That doesn't apply to like a plat. That only applies to like CUPs, variances, PUDs, things like that. So if it's a subdivision, like just a preliminary plat or a final plat, you can deem it incomplete a little bit later, but you've only got 120 days to act on a preliminary plat, and you've got 60 days to act on a final plat. So that's just the time frames that you're dealing with. So you have to make sure you have good, complete applications that's ready for your citizen planners on the planning commission to host a public hearing and have the public come in and comment on. You send out notices notifying the people within a certain radius of the application site, and you post the notice in the paper and online. And that gets you, notifies the public of what's going on, and then they can come in and comment. But you got to make sure you have complete materials for the planning commission to look at before they render their judgment. And Todd was going to go into some more specificity on making the findings, especially related to planned unit developments and CUPs and whatnot. But we do have those. Those are in the code specifically. And even zoning amendments have some, guidance on the judgment being made. But if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than honored to answer them. Otherwise, I can turn it back to you.
I'd like to go ahead and ask the question. You mentioned about you have to go ahead and notify the public.
Yeah.
Define public. Is that people within the city, or is that people that are also bordering the city?
Well, the requirement is that you would notify people within the city within 350 feet of the property. And then usually what you do is you would then post it in the newspaper of record so that the general public who follows city business would see that that public hearing notice as well.
Thank you.
Question.
Councilmember Favalis.
Thank you, sir. Question on this: when the public is notified and there's the opportunity to speak on the project, is it better for the public to have information or to research the information based on a case for code than to come in and based on feeling? I've been this route personally, and I've seen the arguments where individuals came in that were on a personal feeling aspect, and then those that had actually that had gone through the city code and zoning, and were able to discuss it on that basis, which actually went through planning and zoning. Some of those arguments were used during planning and zoning. And a recommendation-wise, is it more powerful to create an argument based on that when you're standing up there talking about, and if you're within that 350 feet?
Well, I guess I would say this, with any planning and zoning, like, people care about their property and land use decisions impacting them greatly, and it can be something that they've got a lot of feelings about. And it is always helpful, I think, for the planning commission at public hearings to hear comments like that, just so they know how people are feeling about things as things come up. However, when the planning commission goes to make their findings, and like if it's a conditional use permit, you have to make specific findings that are based on criteria that are in the code, and you can't just regurgitate the findings in the code. You have to make comments related to those specific items. So if the public is providing them with things that they're seeing as being the experts in the vicinity, that can help the planning commission make those specific findings, that is very, very helpful. So if they're familiar with the code or have code-related questions that help get them to that spot to assist the planning commission in making findings, that I guess would be very helpful for the commissioners.
Any other questions for Nate Sparks?
I have one.
Councilmember Johnson.
In looking at this pyramid here, you used it to show the amount of discretion that city groups have in working through the process. Is this any related to time at all? Is the base of this the beginning of it, and as you go through it, you have less and less discretion, or is this not related to time at all?
In terms of time, it doesn't necessarily have any relevance, because like subdivision ordinances have their own timeframes by statute and zoning related items, and then things that the city initiates on its own, you have as much time as you want. But when you're responding to applications, like when you get up towards the top, some of the plan review and building permit things, you could take more time than what you could for when you're dealing with a variance or a CUP as well. But it's really dependent on the exact situation, though, of what it is that you're looking at. So for example, a building permit isn't necessarily always covered by the 60-day rule, but a septic permit would be, and that's just how they wrote the law.
It just seems like this is really complicated, and I sitting through the August 9th planning session, I felt sorry for the planning commission, because this is really complicated, and how do you work your way through the process and all the specifics and things? I'm still not grasping the whole thing here, and I appreciate you giving it a shot, but I think somehow this needs to be reduced to some kind of a process that's objective and you can kind of follow. Does that make any sense, or is that too idealistic?
No, that makes perfect sense. So basically what the planning commission was looking at, it was somewhat complicated because there was multiple applications and it was a large project, much larger than most of the projects that we've had come through over the past 10 years or so. Now, but you could boil it down to a couple basic elements. It was a planned unit development related to a rezoning. They were trying to rezone the property into a zoning district that would allow for apartments. Now, when you review a rezoning, generally to see if it's consistent with your comprehensive plan. And your comprehensive plan provides guidance, and that's why they were talking about the comprehensive plan quite a bit, was they were trying to determine if that rezoning fit the guidance provided by the comprehensive plan to allow a certain property to have a different zoning district. Now, they also were seeking a conditional use permit in order to put the two buildings on one lot and have some zoning flexibility on their site design. And the Planning Commission was also talking about that. But then there was a third element too, which was looking at the project as a whole And this is one of the things that the planning commission also does, is like through a site plan review, which has less discretion, is you're just ticking off to see if everything that they're proposing meets code. So we were looking at three things all at once, which one was the rezoning, which was the primary, the whole thing that was all about. Because if the rezoning wasn't gonna work, then the project doesn't work, because you can't grant a PUD that doesn't fit the zoning district by how your ordinance is written. But then the other thing that was also important, though, was the site design stuff, because we were looking at things like the width of drive aisles, width of parking spaces, because by zoning, technically, every project has to have a parking spot that's 9 by 20. And if your parking stalls are 9 by 18, technically, you're not supposed to be approving that without granting variances or planned unit development flexibility. And if you're granting planned unit development flexibility for parking stalls to be too small, you have to have a reason for it based on your PUD purpose statements and the criteria in that ordinance as well. But in reality, the flexibilities that they were looking for were just related to putting, two buildings on one site, one parcel of land, which is a common PUD. And then also they wanted to have their buildings out in a certain spot where people in the buildings would have the best views and not be looking at a garage, but that meant they were putting the garage in the front. So that was another thing that they were talking about. So, but the rezoning was the big thing. And that was the primary discussion point there, was trying to figure out if this rezoning is acceptable for this property. And they reviewed the comprehensive plan. They took public testimony on that, and they recommended that it did not, they stated that in their viewpoint it did not. And then because of that, then the CUP for the PUD, would stand to reason that wouldn't be acceptable either, but they provided some additional comment on that. But the site design elements, that was also being reviewed. So that's why, we were talking about the building height, parking lot design, building materials, things like that as well. So there was a lot of different components to that, which would make it seem complicated, because it was.
Councilmember Favalis.
Can you explain the difference between the zone versus the district, please?
Well, in the zoning ordinance, there's several different zoning districts that are identified. So for residential districts alone, you've got a rural residential district for people on septic, R1 for large lot, single family. And as the number gets bigger, the lots get smaller and the more people are in the district. So in your R4 zoning district, which is what they were seeking a rezoning to, it allows not only single family, but it also allows apartment buildings. So the zoning was originally R2, which is a larger lot, single family zoning district, which was based on a historic development pattern, and the zoning district had been there for a long time. They were seeking a rezoning from that R2 to R4. And so those are two different zoning districts that, so they were seeking to change the designation to allow greater density than what had been originally allowed, if that answers your question at all.
It does, because it brings me to the next point. That's what I was looking to see. The reason why this could have been considered for rezoning is because it was, no matter what, it still fit in a residential district concept. But if they were trying to do this project in a commercial or commercial-only district, then you wouldn't be able to rezone on that.
Correct. So generally speaking, your comprehensive plan has a few different land use designations, one of which is called LIV, which is residential. So any of the R districts that you have can be used in that designation. They qualify. And then to see if they meet the criteria, though, to be approved, you have to start wading through the text of the comp plan and see it, but it does qualify. It meets the first threshold, essentially, that of consistency with the comprehensive plan because it's residential. And if they were to try to go into an area that's like industrial, or excuse me, what's the terminology? Work, or what's commercial called? And work, okay. So if they were to try to go in an area that you call work, that would only correspond with like your CI district or your I district. So if they wanted to do an R district in that designation, they would need a comprehensive plan amendment first. So then instead of being the primary discussion point being the rezoning, your primary discussion point would have been the comprehensive plan. So like on this pyramid, you see comprehensive plans at the bottom. So you would have been talking about that, because that would need to be changed to make the zoning decision allowable. So if you were, let's just use like commercial, industrial, residential, just for the sake of argument here. So if you wanted to do something residential in an industrial area, you got to change the fact that it's an industrial area to a residential area first. And that's a tougher decision. I mean, that's harder to get. So the council has the most discretion in that regard. So if you don't like it, you could say, this isn't consistent with our comprehensive plan because we say that that area is industrial. And that's your create authority. But then with the rezoning, you're basing that off of, is this consistent with the comprehensive plan? So if it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, now you're getting more into the area where you have less discretion, so you're making findings of fact more specific to what they're talking about doing, which is what the Planning Commission was doing at the conclusion of their discussion with that last application. But it didn't include a comp plan amendment because of the fact that it was considered to be a residential area.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Councilmember Krogman, please.
Nate, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, try to get some clarification for everybody here. A planning commission meets and they hold a hearing. Let's be clear. That's the only hearing that will be held on these issues if it goes to council, correct?
Yeah, I believe that you have the public hearing at the planning commission level.
Now, the planning commission then makes findings and recommendations, both, is that correct?
They make findings of fact that they then formulate a recommendation based on and forward that to council.
Understood.
And then the council makes a final decision. So when the planning commission's findings of fact and recommendations is what staff will make a resolution to be considered by council on. The council can change that, obviously, tweak it a little bit because it is a recommendation. But that's what the basis of that is, yes. So
But the council cannot change the facts, is that correct?
The council can change the findings of fact, but that's like what the planning commission is recommending.
How can a council change fact when they don't have a hearing? And there's no record of the hearing other than what was written by the planning commission.
At which point,
You want it?
council sends it back down to planning and zoning, saying, do the rest of the job and get us the rest of the information.
These questions. I want
Right.
to understand how it works. Go ahead.
Yeah. City Attorney Coriel, please.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the PUD process that's set forth in our city code does allow for, if the council so chooses, to hold additional public hearings prior to its final decision on the recommendations and the findings by the Planning Commission. There's also specific provisions in the PUD process that state if somebody tells the city councilor, submits an appropriate notice that they want to be heard on the issue at the city council level, they're entitled to do that prior to the council also making the decision. And I'm not sure if that's unique to Sueur's PUD process or not, but that is in there. I don't know how often that happens, and Nate would have to speak on that if it does ever in any other cities or not, but there is an option for that.
Does that satisfy your question, Councilmember Krogman?
Does Nate want to respond to that? Because then I've got one other thing.
Well, on that, other cities do have similar things, and if it's a controversial item, a lot of times the council will allow people to speak at their discretion. It's the chair, the mayor's discretion, if you want to do that or not, as well. And the findings of fact, that's what the planning commission's basing their recommendation on. And the council could have a difference of opinion than the planning commission, because the planning commission's a recommending body. The final decisions by the city council and the public input, the planning commission hosts the public hearing, and the record of that is then reflected in what the planning commission hands off to the council to base your judgment and decision on.
Now, my final question, and I'm going to try to make it as clear as I can. I don't think it's that hard. Within a comprehensive plan for a PUD, and I'm not talking about any particular one, but for a PUD, you could have reasons within that comp plan that would support that project going forward, and you'd have reasons for it not to. Is the role of the Planning Commission to be objective and make findings on both sides of that, or only if they want to recommend it, or if they want to deny it?
Well,
It would be helpful to the council, I would indicate, to have both, just so you know where I'm coming from.
Great question.
Well, typically what the planning commission would do is make findings relevant to like what their recommendation is. But if there were other thoughts, like saying, but if the council thought this, we think that, they could provide that. But typically what they're doing is they're providing an overall recommendation, and then the findings and the basis for that. That's their primary goal, to give you a complete recommendation on the project. But, if there was additional thoughts, usually in their record, it would be reflected on what they thought, that we see this that way, but primarily the overriding theme here is that we think it should be denied for these reasons. But they would probably be discussing these other elements that you're talking about as well during their meeting. But, typically, unless otherwise directed by the council, what a planning commission does is it works on creating a complete recommendation based on the recommendation that it's making, and provides that to the council in their judgment on what the action should be.
Councilmember Sullivan.
I got one quick question, and it's a sticking point for me. At the Planning and Zoning Commission, I heard it several times. In regards to our current infrastructure not being capable of providing services for the PUD that was presented, referring to water lines for fire departments, road widths, access. At what point do we see in this process, do we see a plan as to what it would take to make that improvement, or if it is even up to snuff with what we need for that development?
Well, a couple things. First and foremost, with a subdivision application, they're supposed to be providing and showing the utilities within their project. But if off-site improvements are necessary, that would be something that would be then, that's where it gets a little more complicated, but for the most part, they would need to be providing a plan or working with the city on the provision of a plan to provide the off-site improvements. But, in a project such as that one, like with the staff recommendations were that they, several of those additional things like the extension of the road and some greater sized utilities, the project would have needed to be conditioned on that happening. So that would have needed to have been designed and brought forward as part of that project going forward. I don't know if Todd had additional.
Mr. Mayor, and I think that's why that meeting with city staff really comes important into play, because those are things that we verify in advance. And so we know the size of the water mains, and we know the cost of the road, and we've had Bolton and Mink look at the feasibility of putting that road together. But it does come down to play in certain regard is, does a developer want to help pay for the cost of some of these things as well? And so I think it's important to let them know ahead of time if utilities have to be brought in 2 million feet, what is the cost of bringing that in? And are you willing, as part of your development, to pay this or not, or to help pay it, whatever it might be. And so sometimes some developers or some businesses will say, can you give me assistance maybe through a TIF or something like that can help pay for some of those road improvements or pay for some of the water line connections, pay for fiber. Certain things can be paid for as part of a city partnership. But I think that is something that's really important, is if it's a larger project, especially, that they talk with us in advance to make sure that we believe that we can handle the capacity of their project.
So just to clarify, at the Planning and Zoning Commission for any PUD, that would be items that were brought forward to that committee. So they were aware of that at that point.
Yes, sir. Prior to the Planning Commission meeting, that developer had talked with city staff extensively about what would need to be done to make that development work. So as far as a sprinkler system going, making sure we have 8-inch water mains, where those 8-inch mains are, how we would bring them in, that was all discussed in advance, because we want to make sure that we have the capacity to handle that type of business. The mayor and I somewhat joked about Amazon when they were looking for their site, and could we bring them here? I don't think we could honestly tell a company like Amazon that we could handle a lot of the things that they want. So I think it's important, before you bring someone to town, that you're honest with them about your capacities, and if we can handle the water, the sewer, the electric, the stormwater, things like that are all discussed in advance.
Councilmember Fabulous.
If I can, to piggyback on Councilmember Krogman, when it goes to planning and zoning, the basis on that is that they are supposed to adequately justify a decision, and in doing so, that's with finding facts. And at which point, the reality is that each member should be going into it with an open mind, not predetermined on a project. Correct? Am I getting this right?
Yeah, I did generally, right, yeah.
Okay. And the reason that any discussions that happened with city staff with the applicant, that it was able to go up into planning and zoning based on what I see for the pyramid, is that you're at reasonable discussion on your pyramid, your yellow section, because they weren't looking to change the district for zoning, but only because they were looking to change the zoning of residential.
Right, so it was guided residential in the comprehensive plan, and they were seeking to change the residential designation from R2 to R4, and so that opened up some avenues of discussion, but then also the CUP for the PUD, which is more of basing it on those specific criteria.
Are there any additional questions for Nate Sparks? If not, let's segue on over to our city attorney, Mr. Coriel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Frankly, Nate covered 90% of what I was going to talk about based off of what I spoke with Jasper about. And I guess what I'd like to comment on is two basic things. The way I analyze the pyramid Nate references from the informational memo, it's just preferably how I do it, is it's a difference between what authority the city's exercising with regard to that zoning issue, whether it's a legislative authority or whether it's what we call a quasi-judicial authority. And when you analyze the applications that are on the top end of the spectrum and more towards the middle, you're exercising what we consider quasi-judicial authority rather than legislative. And you're given more legislative authority than you are quasi-judicial authority. And as a quasi-judicial authority-making body, what you're doing is you're applying the criteria that are set forth in the law, which is your city code and state statute and so forth, with the facts that are provided. And with legislative, you're actually creating some of those criteria through whether it's your comprehensive plan or your zoning ordinances. So you're given more discretion legislatively than you are when you're making and applying a fact or an application in front of you to one of those legislative determinations or the law. So that's just my take on the pyramid and why, again, in my opinion, the top of the pyramid, as Nate said, there's less authority than the bottom, or less discretion versus the bottom of the pyramid. With respect to the particularized findings or the specific findings, I think Nate covered it fairly efficiently. I would just point out that in creating the complete record of a determination on an application regarding zoning, the city makes its determination, whether it's approving or denying the application based off of what it's done for its investigation and after its hearings and its determinations. Ultimately, for that to be supportable, I would say, in front of a judge in the event of an appeal, what the court system is going to look at is whether there was sufficient factual findings that supports the city's determination. And the city is going to be given, quite frankly, a relatively large amount of discretion by the judge that's considering an appeal from an applicant that was denied a zoning request, because they're the body that heard all of the facts, considered all of the applications, and exercised their quasi-judicial authority in applying those facts to the law that's in front of it. So what the judge is going to look for in considering whether to overturn or take action negative to what the city's decision was is whether the city's decision was what we call arbitrary or capricious, is the most simple way to put it. And that's that it wasn't sufficiently based in the evidence provided and that they didn't make sufficient facts to support the record of their determination. So when Nate indicated that you can't simply regurgitate the standards that are in your zoning code, that's precisely correct. You have to apply a specific fact to those specific standards. And I'm not going to get into examples because every application is analyzed differently and every finding can be different depending on your own perspective and what information you believe and those types of things. So when it gets to the Planning Commission, the public hearing is a critical component to having evidence of what everybody in the public thinks and how it would affect them and what their beliefs on the application are. And you can apply some of that information as well as whether or not the application itself meets those criteria. So you can't, and I've seen cities do this where they just copy and paste the standards and consider them findings. Those probably won't hold up. So sometimes it takes more time than you want to go through and sift through all of the evidence. Sometimes you might have to have multiple hearings at the Planning Commission level or meetings anyway to come up with accurate and approvable findings by at least a majority of the commission. So other than that, I didn't really have anything else to add to what Nate and Sam provided regarding the PUD process.
Councilmember Krogman.
I'm going to ask one more question. I think, again, we're trying to educate ourselves on the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to stay away from a particular example. But I'd like Nate or Todd or both to comment on what it means to come into a hearing or into a quasi-judicial function as a council. Perhaps there wouldn't be a hearing or there might be. And having an open mind, not committing to anything before we get there, not judging until it's time to make that decision. I'll let you speak to that.
I mean, frankly, the materials regarding the application should have likely been reviewed by individual Planning Commission members or the City Council for that matter once it gets to that point. So I think it's a little bit hard to state that you're not going to have some idea of what you're thinking going into that meeting, but because you've already studied the evidence provided by the application, and that's why it's critical for it to be complete. But that's not the end-all, be-all of the considerations. You also have your own, you can bring in your own personal thoughts and ideas into the decision-making process, but it is important as a collective group to make sure whatever findings you make apply to the relevant application and information you've received and the standard that you're considering. And that's when you get into arbitrary and capricious. And there's no black and white rule. It's somewhat of a gray area that ultimately somebody else besides me is going to decide on whether those findings are sufficient. But objectivity is important. I think complete objectivity is hard given you've already reviewed and analyzed all of the material, and in some cases you've already talked to a lot of the members of the public, so you have an idea of what's going on. But that information isn't necessarily in the record either. And that's why public input in a complete application is absolutely critical to making sure that the decision is made with all of the information available. And again, I'll say it again, that there's a full record of it.
Todd, my question deals again with what Councilmember Favalis had brought up earlier regarding bias. If a potential developer is turned down by the planning and zoning or by city council, and it could be proven that personal bias was used as the reference for that decision, as opposed to finding actual fact within the comprehensive plan or other documents that we have available at our for us to study and know, what's the potential blowback to the city? What kind of litigation would a city be looking at for something of this nature?
I'm not aware of personally, and that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, any legal jurisprudence analyzing whether an individual had some inherent bias coming into a planning commission decision or a city council decision. Those questions are most oftentimes analyzed in terms of whether there's a conflict of interest that exists that would somehow prohibit or cause a commissioner or council member to abstain for or not be involved in the process. And those are typically financially based. And I think I've had this conversation before with a few of you regarding collateral impacts on businesses and those types of things that you may own or properties you may have. It doesn't mean you disregard your hat as a citizen, but you still need to apply appropriate findings to the standards that are there. What happens if in this case, a developer, in the recent example, a developer disagrees with the decision that's completely made after the preliminary, let's say the preliminary design is denied, which doesn't lead to a final design, or if the final design is denied after the preliminary process is done, is they file what we call a declaratory judgment action in the district court that requests the court declare the council's actions to be arbitrary and capricious. And the city would respond with an answer regarding why the decision was not arbitrary and capricious, and ultimately gets litigated, if not resolved prior to that, to a judge to determine whether or not that exact thing happened, whether or not the city's decision was sufficient, whether it wasn't arbitrary or oppressive or capricious, and that's why the record needs to be crystal clear on why the decision was made.
Thank you very much. Any other additional questions regarding the legal side of this? Councilmember Johnson?
I don't know if it's illegal. I'm just wondering, as these PUDs and CUPs and stuff go through processes in different cities and places, do any of them ever end up being a win-win where everybody's happy at the end of it? Or is it inevitable that somewhere along the line, when a decision is made for or against, there's going to be people upset? What's
is that rhetorical?
Well, I
understand.
Maybe
I
don't
understand your
know.
point.
I think as a council or a planning commission, I'd like to know that maybe you want to make the perfect decision, but no matter what you do and how hard you work at it, and how much you incorporate everybody's perspective, you make a decision and not everybody's going to be happy.
The purpose of the way I would respond, I guess, and your zoning code sets forth the purpose of what zoning regulations are for, and it's to protect the health, safety, and welfare and promote orderly development of the town. And I frankly think that appropriate applications are critical to town development, and I think they work all the time. That doesn't mean everybody's happy all the time. And that doesn't mean you don't have public opposition or, certain elected officials, for instance, in various places that disagree with the decisions that are made. But yeah, I think there's win-wins all the time. I mean, I look at the hospital projects that we've had going on in this town for a number of years, and I don't think you can characterize them as anything but successful. And in large part, those start with zoning decisions that are made to allow that type of facility to go up. And I think it's great. So yeah, they absolutely work all the time. And Nate has countless more experience than I do in those particular areas, but sure. But somebody, somebody may not be happy with it, and that's inherent in the process. So.
Samantha.
This time we actually tried something a little bit different, maybe than what was done in the past, is we invited the developer to come for a concept review prior to them turning in their application. And so the hope was to help to generate that win-win if there was something the public maybe wanted to talk about or make comments about. But unfortunately, it didn't quite turn out as staff had hoped it would. But I think we could try that again in the future and really make it people aware that this is them coming in advance, trying to make something a win-win and asking everyone to really keep an open mind. And I think it's important, even for homeowners, there's times that I have to tell them, it's not always easy as staff because I have homeowners come in who have rights with their property and they say, well, I want to be able to build a 5,000 square foot garage and our code doesn't allow that. And so I think it's important to note that staff, there's always times that we can't make a win-win, but I can tell them based on code, this is what you can do. And so I think that's the important thing, that we're knowledgeable about maybe something that they can't do, but something that they could do instead. And so Nate's been fabulous with that, and I appreciate Todd helping and Jasper. And I think that's the important thing to remember, is that isn't our job necessarily to say yes or no, but it's our job to make sure that the code is followed, as is the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Well, if we didn't think that this was a complicated and convoluted process before, I think we certainly had our eyes open tonight. We're going to now have an update on the INH situation, and right after that, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
So the night of the public hearing, the developer was actually here. The next day, he did withdraw his application. So the application is no longer being considered. And so I wanted to make sure that that was clear to everyone that he has formally withdrawn it. And so I have had some talks with the property owner, and I think that's where it's interesting, is as a property owner trying to figure out what are her rights then. It's always an interesting dance that, again, staff is trying to work with her to make sure that she understands what her rights are as a property owner as well. So it's important that everyone knows that that's what our role is to make sure that people are aware of what our code says and what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and really that we're not here to pick and choose winners and losers. It's our job to make sure that everyone understands what our code says. And as we're redoing our zoning code, I think it's especially important that people are involved and people really give feedback, because going forward, if they're still not allowed to build their 5,000 square foot garage and that's what they want, maybe there's a compromise that we can find with homeowners to be able to give them something that they want and still keep it safe and fair for their neighbors. So it's definitely an important process.
Well, you bring up a great point, Samantha, and I guess that would be, from a legal point of view, there's obviously an obligation to the landowner in this case as well, and there's also potential blowback that could happen regarding the city on this if this wasn't handled the way it needed to be. Is that correct?
Well, and I think at any time, that's why we have our policies and we have our guiding documents, and the state has some regulations that go into this to make sure that not just the city of Sueur, but that every city in Minnesota handles this the way that we're supposed to. So you received the documentation tonight from the League of Minnesota Cities. They're making sure that we do things the way that we're supposed to. And I'm glad Todd's here. He's always keeping an eye on me, making sure that we're doing things the way that we're supposed to. But that's the important thing as a city, is I don't know every single thing, but I'm definitely learning as much as I can, reading our code, reading our comprehensive plan. It's so important to note to the public why these documents are important and why they should get involved, because our comprehensive plan is now our new guiding document. And so I want to make sure that that was what the community really wanted going towards 2040.
Any additional questions regarding the update on the INH situation? If not, I'll entertain a motion for a 5-minute recess. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to go ahead and reconvene. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Boy, you almost had me hanging there. Okay, we're going to now go into our 2019 budget review and discussion. And again, this is at the 50,000-foot level because some of this stuff, the Personnel and Budget Board Committee is not, we're not in a position to go ahead and make any recommendations at this time, and certainly our city administrator is aware of that.
Mayor Hague, members of the City Council, before you is going to be a series of documents, slides. I'm just going to informally go through them and let you know kind of what we've been talking about at the Personnel and Budget Committee. So this first page you'll look at, this is kind of the overview of what our base levy is, and I'll kind of indicate by circling some stuff. And then what are all of our debt service obligations that we have going into 2019? We can look at those. And then we'll look at the EDA levy, which is also part of the general fund levy. So you'll notice quite a bit of change, fluctuation here. And this is because, one, we went through a reorganization this year. So there's going to be some implementations in there. Overall, that reorganization should have a net effect. Net negative effect slightly. But what you'll see is our general fund, we're projecting $105,000 less than this year, but you'll see the community center is increasing by a little bit more than that, and that's tied to that rec coordinator position. You'll also notice that our capital improvement plan fund that we had $400,000 allocated to that in 2018. We're proposing to bump that up to $620,000 based on some of the projects that we have. And I'll show you what some of the funding sources are for that after this. You'll see our Johnson Control loan that we have. This is essentially a debt service payment that we have for a project that we embarked on with Johnson Controls in 2008. So you'll see a slight increase in that. That's just based on some principal interest changes that we have to make. You'll go through and you'll see all of the debt service bonds that we have. You'll notice that one bond did fall off, the 2008 AGO tax abatement bonds. That one actually just got paid by the EDA last night, or approved for payment. That is for the Park Knowles edition tax abatement. So you'll see that basically has a net reduction of $36,000 for our debt service. And you'll hear me talk about tax or bonding capacity a little bit throughout various meetings. And what we're looking at, and I'll show you the debt schedule that we have. As debt falls off, that opens up what I consider bonding capacity. So we're going to need that capacity if we're going to, we're likely going to have to bond for the 112 Turnback project. That'll be a very expensive project for the city. Also, there's some piggyback projects on there that we're going to have to evaluate. One potentially being the opening of Main Street. We're going to have to look at that. There's a couple streets that are unpaved that are adjacent to 112 that we're going to have the discussion about. Just to get some direction from City Council on that. So there may be some potential other piggyback projects, I'll call them, on that 112 Turnback. But overall, you can see that there isn't much change except for quite a bit in some of these things related to the general fund and community center. I'll move on to the next item, and we'll look at, this is just general trends as far as what the tax levy summary is and how much we're levying for taxes and what that's looking like. And you can see that this is increasing, but what we're seeing is that the tax capacity is also increasing. And you'll hear me and you'll hear Zach talk about growing with the community. And what that means is that we grow as a city at the same rate that the community is growing as far as their tax values of their house go. Last year, I believe the overall tax impact for the community was 0.9%. That was one of the goals set up by City Council initially for the personnel and budget, is we're going to try to get that as close to a 0% tax impact as possible. Right now, the county is projecting a 4% increase in property values throughout the community on average. We'll get final numbers for that come October, and we'll be able to plug those numbers in accordingly. And what we're hoping is that maybe that's up about 0.5%, and then we can get some numbers as far as our benefits packages, health insurance, our general liability insurance through League of Minnesota Cities, we'll get those numbers by October, and then we can really fine tune the numbers of the budget. And the idea is that we'll get that as close to a 0% tax impact as possible. Again, this is just another way of looking at that, this trend bar graph.
And to be clear, when you say a 0% tax impact, you're talking about the city's portion. We're not talking about the county's responsibility or the school district, correct?
Correct. We're just talking about the city portion of the taxes that are on the tax roll. So this is a neat figure, and we've started talking about this a little bit more in detail as far as what this looks like. So the median household value in Sueur is roughly $165,000. What that means is that our actual taxes for the city portion only in 2019 or 2018 was estimated at $1,299. Based on the proposal, and what this proposal is, and you'll see, we'll go back to this top page, or the first page. I should have showcased this a little bit more. But the general total levy impact, we're proposing for the preliminary levy to be roughly 8.31%. And this is high, and just a refresher is that this is a number that we set in September, and it's a number that we cannot exceed. So it's set high by design because there's unknowns that we don't know about, general liability insurance, health insurance, things like that we're conservatively estimating. So that's where we're at as far as the tax impact goes. If we look at what the impact is on the houses, you look at this $165,000 home, you'll see that proposed increase of an 8.67 or 8.37% would be $54 a year. That would be a 4.16% tax impact, and that this would actually be a monthly increase of $5 per month. This number, it looks like this is wrong. But so this number, this is that tax impact that we're looking at, this 4.something%. This is the number that we're going to try to refine down to get as close to zero as possible. So, and I'm fairly confident we have some things in the budget that we can adjust if we have to get that down to what the council priorities were or are. Yep.
You said something wasn't correct there?
Yeah, the 2019 monthly. This is actually the monthly. This is the increase overall. This monthly number must not have been calculated correct, but this would basically be what this number is. This $4 per month.
If you divided 1353 by 12, you're going to get about 113.
Maybe okay. Maybe that's right. Yeah, that's the monthly amount that you're going to pay for your taxes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good math, Dave. Just looking at, so this next form that you'll see, we're looking at the revenues and the expenditures for the city, just the general fund. Now, this includes everything except for the community center. The community center we call out separately so we can kind of keep an eye on that a little bit closer because that's a pretty large expenditure. So what you'll see is you'll see some differences in what the 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019 taxes are going to be. And what you'll see this number went down 12%. That's because you'll see when we get to the community center, that number actually increased. So we're putting more money into the community center, and that's tied to that rec coordinator position. Looking at licenses, we're looking at roughly licenses and permits. We're looking at roughly a 15% increase is what we're projecting. That's just based on the market conditions within the community. Intergovernmental, you'll see this. This is associated with LGA and some additional other grant dollars we may get. You'll see that this is actually going down 3%, and that's because of that small cities grant for 2019 that is not funded legislatively. So you'll see roughly a $30,000 decrease in this. So overall, for the general fund, you'll see the revenues are projected to go down 5%, but if we compare that to the community center, you'll see that those go up. We'll look at expenditures a little bit in detail, but I'll call out the ones that are very specific. And so you'll see a reduction for accounting of 59%. And one thing that the Personnel and Budget Committee we've talked about is adding an additional person to the staff as a finance director. This is something that we had historically pre I guess Janelle Teppin. During her tenure here, we transitioned to having a contracted finance director, looking at what some of the needs are and some of the things that are going on in the city and some things that have happened with the reorganization. We looked at potentially adding a finance director. We would obviously, I think it's safe to say we like the services that AEM provides for us. And if we don't find a good candidate, which I'll tell you guys all right now that's going to be a very difficult thing to fill, is to find an adequate finance director. But if we don't, we still have AEM to use. So that'll change the budget a little bit, but it's in the budget to include that as include a finance director. But you'll see that there will be the way that the contract payments are designed right now. They come out of the general fund mostly, and that would likely change anyway in 2019, as we would utilize more enterprise funds to pay for these, because frankly, the finance director works with those utilities quite a bit. So that can be justified to have that. So that's a big change. So this is actually a reduction in cost for accounting, but then when you do the enterprise fund budgets, those will increase because there's an offset there. The city attorney fees, you'll look at that. You'll look at the note here. The cost of doing business and activity levels within the city has risen. You'll see that, and Todd has left, but there's a lot of additional things that he has to do for criminal prosecutions that he hasn't had to do in the past. And this is due to changes in judges at the county that require different things. So you'll notice if you look at, or I can provide expenditures to date for this, for legal fees, you'll see the administrative legal fees are down. So we're not going as close to what we thought we were going to be, but the ones related to the police department and the prosecution sense are going up. But we're also receiving additional fees for fines and things like that. So there's a little bit of an offset, but overall that cost is increasing a little bit or fairly significantly. Looking at some of these other ones, the police reserves, you'll see that number is disappearing. We're not getting rid of the reserves. We're just incorporating that into the general police fund budget. So you'll see like a slight increase of 2% into that. That's essentially the police reserves. That's the same as the emergency management EOC line item. That's such a small number. We decided internally that we would then just incorporate that into another fund, just for the ease of looking at things. You'll see the building inspection, you'll see a slight decrease. This is because we had a little bit of overhead associated with office supplies and just getting things set up for a new member. And then streets and parks, you'll see a large increase here, but that's because of the combination of streets and parks moving from Parks and Rec to streets and parks. So, yes.
Not to stop you on it, but while we're on the building inspection, this is the overall cost of what we spent so far with the new, for the entire year, right?
Yes.
And the question that I have is, how are we doing as far as permits and permit sales? Is that up?
Definitely. So
Good.
we were just able to run our first report in PIMS, that software that was approved earlier this year for building inspection services. And I believe the last, I'm going off memory, but I believe that there's been $3.3 million of new construction in town since we started that. And that was in April is when we initiated that. So there's been $3.3 million of new construction. That translates to roughly $43,000 in building permit revenues, plan review revenues that we see. So we're looking at just from April, all of April, May, June, and basically July. Those 4 months, I think we're exceeding what I thought we would do. But we are in a period of time where we have 7 house permits, so we have a lot more house permits than what we thought we would. We were basically planning for around 1 or 2 per year, so it's good. I mean, I think preliminarily, without having a full year of data, I think we made the right decision on hiring somebody. And I'll give Justin or the building official, a lot of credit. He has fit in very well, and I think he's done a very good job. So I'm excited. I think it'll be a good fit, and I'd like to just get 1 year of data under our belt. So.
I guess I can talk loud. So how, just at EDA the other night, we were talking about the whack and sack incentive program, that we subtract those costs off of the permits, right?
Correct.
How does that match up? We have more building, but we're also reduced how much money we receive.
That's correct. That doesn't affect the building official or building inspection fund. That's just the water fund is what that affects. So the water fund just won't see those WAC revenues of $3,000 per home, which would be $21,000 for this year. So I'll jump on to streets and parks. You'll see there's a substantial increase, but we have gotten rid of the Parks and Recreation Department line item in general. So you'll see an increase in there. Overall, what we're seeing is a minus 4% total expenditure. So we're seeing this, but when we get to the community center, you'll see there will be a slight increase. And the big thing is to look at what the overall is. If you're looking at overall, it's 8.37% is what's proposed. Looking at what we have for a transfer in, we've had a transfer in of $500,000 from the electric department. That's associated with the franchise fee that we have. That's included in the electric bill, so that is the same as 2018 numbers. Overall, you'll see that we're basically running a revenue neutral budget right here. So this number right here, the revenues equal expenditures.
We have streets and parks, and then we have streets. Is that by design?
Yeah, so you'll see that streets has been removed as well. So you'll see minus 100%, and that's line 7. Moved all of these into one department. Overall increase with departments is $20,000. Yeah, no, I didn't touch on it, but yeah, the streets line item was removed. The Parks and Rec was removed, and then they were combined into streets and parks.
Forestry was removed.
Yep.
One quick question just for clarification on the accounting.
Yep.
It's a 30% increase, 50% decrease, but that's a full-time employee we're potentially going to look for, correct, with this proposal?
Yes, so for the rec department you're talking about.
No, the accounting.
Oh, yes. So
Right.
you're asking what the overall impact is with everything.
No, but I mean basically a third of that employee would be covered by out of this budget.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, roughly it'd be 33% from general fund, 66% from all the other enterprise funds.
Does that include any type of clerk, administrative support other than the building official?
For
The line for building official, whatever it is.
building inspection. Yep.
Yeah. Does that include the clerical person in addition to the full-time employee?
That doesn't. That person falls under the community development department, which is general fund.
So we're clear.
Yep. It's all under the general fund, but technically it falls under Samantha's department.
But to be clear, back to that, mine was just the accounting. That accounting when Jasper was
Yeah,
referring
that's
to.
accounting, yeah,
Right, and that's what I was referring to.
yeah, understood.
All right.
So the actual overall, when you get the enterprise funds and the general fund together, is it an increase in cost for the full-time finance person versus the contracted services you have now?
It will be. So right.
And the enterprise fund are bearing that increase.
They are, and they would likely, if we would not have a finance director, a full-time employee, we would change that cost share for the AEM contract to reflect what I feel is more reasonable for the enterprise funds contributing to it. So, but overall, so our contract with AEM, I believe, will be $77,000 this year, or 2019. So we have another 2 years technically on the contract. We can get out of the contract at any time if we give 30 days notice.
And that's just strictly for the accounting side. That does not include the payroll services.
Correct. Yep, that's a separate contract that we have. So that's just for workforce solutions aspect.
For 1 day a week.
Yeah, 1 day a week. But Zach will attest to this. I bother him quite a bit. So, and he's very, very responsive. So it'll take a very good person for me to recommend that we fill that position, because I am satisfied with AEM. I just look at the $77,000 annual payment that we make for 1 day of week in the office, and think that, if we bump that up to another $30,000 a year, up to like 105 to 110 a year, we get somebody here that's a salaried employee that's here 5 days a week. That's a huge service. It falls right in line with our long-term priorities of having good fiscal management. Also, part of our audit that we get every year we get the segregations of duties findings. This could help out with that. I don't know if it'll completely get rid of it, but it'll add another person within our staff that could have another redundancy, just another check and balance on some of our finance practices.
But the payroll services fees stay there.
We would keep the payroll services contract. That would be something that I'd be keeping an eye on and making sure that we still need it, and that the finance director doesn't. If they need more to do, that would be something that we would then end. I really like the payroll contract, and it's minimal compared to what we pay for Workforce Solutions. I'd prefer to have our finance director working on some of the bigger picture things other than processing payroll.
Like what improvement would this full-time person bring versus our 1 day a week guy now? What, for example, would?
Just general financial oversight. So if a manager wants to be able to look at a report or have questions about finance questions, they could have somebody that they could come and look at something with. There's just, well, for example, if we get a finance director that can also be a financial manager, which currently right now Zach Dowd is, they can help us with investment techniques, strategies, planning, things like that we're not currently really doing. I utilize 4M fund for what we have our investments in, but there might be other options, other strategies that they could help us out, earn more interest, things like that. So I do have a formal list of things. I can't remember if I presented it at personnel and budget, but I do. I've made a list of things that we will benefit from by having a finance director.
And having the person be an employee of the city, there's no transparency conflicts or anything like that, having the person that's part of the city also handling the financial aspect.
No, it's ideal, and it's by far the more standard model that you'll see out there.
I would assume that one of the things that Dave would be happy with having the financial person on board would be that our bars and graphs would be correct when we got them. He would have more time to dedicate to that when they show up.
One last question on that, on
Yep.
the accounting part. Currently, so you said this would be a cost share between the other two enterprises. Currently, what are we doing for accounting on those two? So they have separate contracts with, or does that all fall under this?
Yeah, no, it all falls under the AEM Workforce Solutions contract. The way that it's currently partitioned, I guess the percentages that each entity is paying for that, I believe should be changed because of just the workload that Zach's doing for the enterprise funds. That should transition. And right now, it's almost all 100% general fund. Transitioning some of that to the enterprise funds will help with the general fund levy. Overall, yeah, there is going to be an increase for that position, but I think that we can evaluate the cost benefits of that.
Zach do any of that work through the city for MRPUC too?
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't. None
No.
of that goes through there.
No, so that's all done through
Yeah,
Abdo, Eichen, Myers,
Yeah.
which is a subsidiary, or AEM is a subsidiary of Abdo, Eichen, Myers. So they're related, but not necessarily together at all. So
That would be something that'd be put on a full-time person's plate to go ahead and handle something like that.
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
All right, I will move on to the community center. So you'll look at this, you'll see, yeah, there's a substantial increase in what's being allocated here, and that's tied to that rec coordinator position. Charges for services, you'll see there's a significant increase here. Basically, what we're doing is we're making right the transfer in and transfer out for community education services. Typically, we've budgeted only $200,000 a year for that. That's been more like $300,000 a year for those services. So you'll see that expenditures actually, where do you see that in here? Yeah, item 2, yeah. So increase in community education revenues are higher, and these are just a pass-through for the school district. And just a heads up, my communications with the new superintendent, we're likely going to have to come up with a different way that this works. And I agree 100%, because the way it works right now is there isn't really a check, a confirmation stage that they're confirming what's happening in community education is what's getting paid out. So what we're going to try to do is establish a way for when somebody comes in and makes a payment for community education, that whenever there are community education payments made, it's made directly into the school district's account. Not because right now the process is it goes into the city account, and the city then has an expenditure out to the school district. That'll clean up. That'll get rid of the pass through altogether, and it'll just go straight to the school district. We're gonna have to look at what some of the software requirements are for that. I think we can make it work. It's just basically changing the procedure up a little bit. So we have a future meeting with the finance person from the school, Zach Dowd, myself, Lane, to try to figure this out. So this might change even this year if we can get it figured out this soon, but it might be something that happens mid-year next year. You look at the expenditures for the swimming pool are down. That is because it's salaries for a reduction in salaries and where they're coded for 2019. You'll see you'll have a swimming pool, and then you'll have basically, so the swimming pool is the outdoor pool. And the way that we're changing it up is that we have an outdoor pool and we have an indoor pool. The indoor pool salaries go to the rec budget. Right now, the way it's set up is that I believe the way that we think and the way that it's been coded so far through 2018 is that the numbers are just a little off as far as where those revenues should come from, as far as what hours are being worked in each location. So we've changed that. So now the salaries in the personnel services aspect, you'll see those are increasing. One for the rec coordinator position, but two, the part-time salaries for lifeguards are being, more of them are coming out of this personnel services line item than the swimming pool line item. And the way it works is at the end of the year, we can run a report through Paylocity, and we can see where people have been coding their time, and we can kind of look at how many hours somebody's worked at the outdoor pool. That helps us determine, well, how much money did the outdoor pool make? How much did it lose every year? We can look at that every year and see what it is. And it'll be a little bit more exact now. And this is just basically some bookkeeping administrative things that we're doing. This all comes out of the same fund. It all comes out of the general fund.
So prior, we really didn't have any way of knowing what the revenues were for the outdoor pool?
We were just estimating based on some of these unknowns, the way that time was being tracked in the old system, we weren't able to differentiate between the outdoor pool and the indoor pool. Now we can.
Just out of curiosity, I actually have two questions. First one, the year-to-date, that should be May of 18, correct?
It should be, yes.
And then secondly, under the swimming pool, why is the year-to-date so low on that?
Because
that accurate?
Because it's only through May. So when this was developed, it's only through May. The pool doesn't open until the end of May.
Oh, okay.
So there's hardly anything. If we would run it right now, that number would be higher because the pool is closed now. So you'll see repairs and maintenance. We've included that. We've moved that into administrative and general department for easier accounting. So you'll see that amount has been moved around. And what we're basically trying to do is reduce the number of line item expenditures so it's easier to track. Because you'll see like even the EOC emergency management stuff will have like $1,300 or $2,000 in one line item. It's cumbersome to be able to track that. It's more easier. It's easier to look at too and look at just general trends. let's see, total expenditures, you'll see are going up 27%. The revenues, basically, we're showing that we're going to go down 10%, but we're still going to show a profit in here based on this. So,
And this is before any decisions made regarding any recommendations that our PAC would come up with for a rate change for the monthly or yearly subscriptions to use the community center and the pool.
correct. This is assuming that those rates are the same as what they are right now.
So can I ask a question down on the excess revenues is 174,263, and then down below there's a transfer out, no longer moving money. Explain that. I don't get forward. What are we transferring out to?
Well, it's essentially a bookkeeping function because all of this is housed under the general fund. So that 174, that whatever that profit is here, is just in the general fund. So it's included into the revenues for the general fund. But essentially what this is saying is that you're transferring this out in your revenue neutral budget. If we wanted to have it be revenue neutral all the way up at this line item, we would have to come up with $174,000 more in expenditures.
I thought you said the community center was going to result in an increase in the levy.
It is. So you'll see that there is an increase. So in 2018, the taxes that were generated were 137, and actually this 174. Let me just look at something really quick. What did Zach put in here? No longer for the levy going there already. Okay, so this is money that's associated with the capital improvement plan. Yeah. So we're looking at that, and that's going out to the 420 fund.
Just increased expenditures a couple $100,000. In order to do that, we increased the taxes.
Correct, and that's, yeah, so this 174, this is going to be transferred out, and by out, it's in the same general fund umbrella, but it's getting moved to the 420 fund pool of money that's for capital improvements. Does that make sense?
That's this right there, the
Yeah, so if you look at this number, you'll look at this is zero, so this is essentially a net revenue or revenue neutral budget. Let's see, what is this? Well, this is the EDA. EDA went through their budget last night. There isn't too much with this. Their budget's increasing by $200 next year. That's just a product of the roughly 4%. Well, it's 8.37% of what their original budget was. So, and you're looking at this, so their budget that they have right now, they're banking $25,000. So, but the EDA kind of handles their own budget. So, you have in front of you the capital improvement plan, so you can go through this and look at what some of these items are. Full disclosure, these will likely change. They're not in there. So sorry. Okay. I will send these out to the group and let you guys look at this. But this has been included in the Personnel and Budget Committee. Full disclosure, the capital equipment plan will likely change as we're looking into leasing items as opposed to purchasing. We're going to have a conversation about that, the benefits of leasing, some of the costs that we have with leasing. But in general, this gives us a good idea of some of the projects that we've identified that we can do in 2019. Some of the big ones, and some of these, so some of the revenue sources, and I'll just pull up this little cheat sheet here. And this was given to the personnel and budget as well. So looking at some of the revenue sources are for the CIP in 2019. We have a carryover. This is the estimate from 2018. So the big one is the TAP sidewalk project. That's why this number's so large. The 2019 levy, this one's actually $620,000. This is the TAP grant associated with the sidewalk project. The grass rig, so in the CIP or CEP, you'll see a grass rig for the fire department. They've indicated that their private organization would donate $30,000 to that. $49,000 is the contributions from the townships. FAA dollars. This is for an airport project, a taxiway extension. Basically, this is 90% of the project. 10% or 5% is covered by MnDOT. The other 5% or $12,500 is associated with the city.
Whatever loan we had for the airport this past year, what was that, with Hutchinson or something?
Yep.
That's all been taken care of, correct?
Correct. Yep, we paid them back. We didn't use as much of their expenditure as what we needed, but the way that works is we needed $250,000 from them. We received the $250,000. We paid it back right away. Yep.
What's the 2018 carryover?
So these are for the projects that were identified for 2018 that we won't do.
And the major one?
The major one is the TAP sidewalk project.
How can we count that twice? How can we count it in the carryover and also list it as a number 4 on there?
Because we funded this 100% with general fund levy in 2018 because we were not able to submit for the grant reimbursement, which is this amount, this 517 until 2019. So the idea was that the city would fund that project 100% on their own, and then they would submit for reimbursement in 2019. So that's why. So in 2018, we budgeted to pay for that project 100% by ourselves. But good question.
But the net cost to the city is roughly $250,000 then.
It would be 137,000. It wouldn't be the difference between these two because there's a couple other things that got carried over, some equipment things.
Okay. 37,000.
Down on the FFA dollars, we get 225 from feds.
Yep.
But didn't you say that we had to pay 12,500?
We do. So the total, I'll go back to this CIP. The total airport taxiway project is $250,000. $225,000 of that comes from the federal government, FAA. $12,500 comes from MnDOT. $12,500 comes from the city.
That's that 95-5 split.
Yep, 95-5. Yep. Yep. There isn't anything for city council chambers. We're looking at doing some lighting stuff here in 2020. We're looking at doing that for the whole city hall. We have tiles that potentially have some asbestos-based glue in them. What we want to do is we don't want to tear them down. We want to just kind of keep them up there and go something. Well, yeah, and it's safe. But so we don't want to tear it down because there's a large cost in asbestos mitigation if you actually tear. Yeah. So, but yeah, looking at some of these lights, there's rebates, potential cost savings for going to LED type can lights. Yeah.
The Taj Mahal.
It's only in the audience area, though. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
I lost my hair because of it.
That's because you weren't out there before.
You'll see a variety of projects in the recreation department, and this is something that RPAC looked at 2 weeks ago now, or about a week ago, actually. And they're going to look at this and make sure that this lines up with what their priorities are. A couple big items are possibly a concession stand renovation. Trying to think if there's anything else. You'll see some really large projects out here. This is something that might be a moving target depending on if we can get grant dollars. But we just want to identify, we've looked at some of these things.
Looks like you got some money to be spent up there, Ben, huh?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
You'll look at the Streets and Parks Department. Now, this is combining these two departments, so you'll see some things that slightly differ from last year.
Jasper,
Yep.
can I stop you before you get too far ahead?
Yeah.
The Zamboni, did that come out of the 18 budget?
It's going to come out of the 18 budget, yes.
Okay.
So, yep, that was an item that was identified in 2020. It's no longer on here because basically we're going to try to maneuver it so that we can get invoiced in 2019. But per direction from our finance director, he said just do it in 2018. We'll be able to do it. We'll be able to document it a little bit better. So, yeah, you won't notice the Zamboni in here.
It doesn't, how badly did that harm our 2018 budget at the end? I mean, it was a big expenditure.
It was, and it will. There will be an impact, but because the Zamboni expenditure is included in this item that I showed you, this carryover. So there was quite a bit of carryover, and that's because we didn't replace all of the equipment that was identified. There's still some time to do that, but I don't think we will. We're gonna try to extend it out a little bit more and talk about leases and things like that a little bit more in the future. So the streets and parks, you'll see the big expenditure is the TAP sidewalk project. I believe we have 4 easements left to get signed. Once that happens, we'll finalize the project. We'll go out to bid, and then we'll have 2019 to complete that project. That's a substantial project. You'll see the increase. Basically, we've earmarked $200,000 a year for street maintenance projects.
So I see that the dark park is on there for 2019. What's to do? Still up there.
Yep, so there's one last item, and that's for the dog wash station. So we almost got there. We have money that's being carried over, but the dog wash station itself is roughly $18,000 to get that put in. We have the concrete all done. We have it all stubbed in, electric, water, all of that. But this is the last item. If you remember, the dog park was going to be a 3-year phased-in project, going from 2018, 2019, and finishing in 2020. Because of the donations that we've received, we were able to move that up to a 2-year project. It's essentially done except for that dog wash station.
And you still have another $2,500 coming from Lions.
Correct. Yep. Well, actually, I believe we have 2 $2,500.
We've already got 2.
Did we already get 2? Okay. I know there's a check sitting in my mailbox, I think. So
I want to talk about the streets, and I want to plant the seed. I'm going to go on record right now and say that the $200,000 after last night's discussion we had with the pavement management plan is nowhere close. Now, I know that we have some things to discuss within the P&B on this, but realizing that we're looking at about $840,000 a year for the next 40 years to stay even with our overall street situation in the city of Sueur, and that's just strictly our city streets, not counting our county and state roads. And we talked last night about some opportunities to look for some grant money and some other things for that. I think that we have to be looking at a larger number than 200K. And I just want to throw that out there. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna be talking about that in P&B, but give it some thought.
So we are going to be talking about that in P&B. And is our conversation going to result in something that will impact this year?
Yeah, I think so.
we can talk about it. So this is a substantial increase from last year. This number was $75,000 this year. So that's over doubling what we allocated this year. And I fully admit it's not sufficient. But you'll see we do have an expenditure of $2.25 million in 2021. You look at the average, if you look at street improvement projects, you look at averages, we're right where we probably should be as far as that average goes. But we can definitely look at it.
But that's what we need to look, that's the kind of things we need to look at, how this, it isn't 840 a year, it's 200,
2.25 million. Yeah.
And we need to project that out.
That's what we're going to do.
Correct. Yep. And I think we're pretty close to where that should be, but we can definitely have more conversations about
I think
that.
there's some things that we can look at regarding how we can approach our side of things regarding just filling potholes, and that's what we've done, or seal coating in the past. I think there's some things that we can do to make our roads more drivable and get a better customer satisfaction rating from our constituency.
And yes, and we are looking at that. And this $200,000, this increase would allow us to do more patching. So there's areas that we would need to do patching. And what that is, basically, you take a saw, you cut the asphalt, you take out the subgrade, you recompact it, you put it down, you put down new asphalt, a larger section than just a pothole. You might see us out there cutting a 2x2 square for a pothole. This would be something where we'd maybe get like 4 or 5 potholes in one area, or maybe some spidering of the asphalt, get it all out of there, make sure the subgrade is good, patch it. Those types of things we don't really do right now.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think we were looking at a CEP item for a hot box for 2019. Is that correct?
Correct.
The
And
street
if
department would be able to use, so that we'd be able to do more with the blacktop for a longer period of time with this hot box, as opposed to getting it from the facility and having to use it or lose it. And I
Correct.
think that's pretty much what's happened in the past for many years.
Well, if there aren't any questions about the CIP, we'll transition to the CEP. Go ahead.
No, and just because last night when we were talking, we were at 75,000 allocated.
That was for 2018.
Okay, so the purpose with us sitting and looking at this now is that you'd already had an increase on the roads, and this is what we're looking for roads. Because my big concern was that we were allocating the same amount of money for sidewalks as we are for roads, and roads are far more expensive. Not that I would ever want to drop down on what we're putting aside for sidewalks, but it petrifies me in the condition that the roads are in that we'll ever keep up with it. And I'm worried even with this. I'm in agreement with Greg on that.
Yeah, and I would say we could look at it as a whole. This is a very substantial increase. If we want to ramp it up going out to 2023, that'd be easier to do. We could allocate more funds for that, and that would just allow us to do more patching, basically. So
We don't have anything for sidewalks after 2019.
we don't. No, that we don't have any sidewalk areas designated for repair after the TAP sidewalk project.
I'm sure we'll have some with
thought we
the
had-
112 turnback project.
That's included in this 2.25.
That's inclusive of everything.
Yes.
Okay, I misunderstand, because I thought that we were going to have basically a line item on sidewalks that we're going to be every year putting money aside for that, because we have lots of sidewalks to do.
Correct. And that line item, so in 2018, that line item was removed. So there was a line item for sidewalks at $75,000. That was removed, and it's been combined into that capital improvement plan. So if we have sidewalk projects that we want to do, if that's a priority, we can build that in. If we want to do, 4 blocks of sidewalk every year, we can do that. We can build that into the budget. It's just we have this enormous sidewalk project that we're doing in 2019. If we want to add some additional projects 2020 and on, we can definitely do that.
33,000 a block for sidewalk, is that about the going rate?
I believe so.
I don't think that it's fair to anyone to do that project. You put in 31 and say, we're good for another 5 years. No, you continue to save and continue to work on more sidewalks. We need them fixed in town.
I agree. Moving on to the CEP, so Capital Equipment Plan. So you'll see on here, this 96 Ford replacement. In the old CEP, this was a full replacement at $55,000. What this is basically a Sprinter van with some equipment in it for the facility manager. Right now, he drives around in a 96 Ford F-150 that has to open the door from the outside, roll down the window kind of deal. So it's something that I would have liked to replace it this year, but it's a large expenditure, and we're looking at doing a lease on that. And we'll talk more about leases in detail, and we'll have a comprehensive breakdown between why we should think about leases, why they're some of the challenges with them, things like that. One thing that we have in here is a phone system replacement lease. So the phone system in City Hall is very old. It's very challenging. We talked about this in personnel and budget. We're looking at all the options. So one of the things that was brought up at personnel and budget is why can't we use some sort of mobile service like Verizon to be able to provide phone service where we don't have to go voice over IP or have physical sets that are basically landlines. We're looking at every option. We're going to get a bunch of different quotes for this. This is something that we'll likely do mid-year in 2019. So it'll give us some time to be able to evaluate what we actually want to do. This HVAC system, little note, we have right now we have 2 compressors for our air conditioner. They're supposed to talk to each other, work together. A lot of times when it gets really hot, humid, they don't. Certain things don't work. You'll notice it's been hot and humid in here. We have an air handler on our main level that's inside the building. What this would do is it would move that whole air handler system, it would move it onto a rooftop unit. It would free up some space back in the back area where there's basically going to be a new server room back there. So it's something that has been identified in like the 2015 facility plan. It's something that the boiler should also be replaced, but we're not going to do that for quite some time.
Are they saying whether or not, because you're going from two compressors, I'm assuming you're gonna go down to one compressor
Yes,
and probably a 4 or 5 ton unit, which would mean that you're gonna have more efficiency out of it than what you're getting now. So
Way
there should
more.
Be a savings over time.
there will be, definitely.
Way more Sueur.
Let's see, fire department, these items, just a little note about these, any capital projects that you see in here, the basic split between the townships and the city. City covers 55%, townships cover 45%. That's the general number that we try to stick to, so if you look at that, you can kind of break down what the township costs are for these things versus what the city costs. This 1976 grass rig replacement, what we're looking at is, right now, the fire department has a subcommittee that's looking at pricing out a new grass rig for them to replace this 1976. You'll see this audio video fiber project. What that means is that we're gonna run some fiber out to the fire department and get them hooked into our city network. I don't know why that wasn't done when the building was built, but we will get it hooked in. One of the biggest challenges that I found when we have our retreat is that, one, there is no internet out there that I can hook into. Two, the screens that we have, it's basically a projector. You can't really see anything. So we're looking at it, possibly putting 2 video monitors similar to the size of these at the fire hall. I'd love to be able to use the fire hall more for work sessions, just events in general, because it's frankly a little bit more inviting than the basement of City Hall. And the fire department uses that area quite a bit for trainings of their own. So enhancing some of the AV equipment will be something that will be well received.
Can you bring that Jaguar right through Swan Street near the school?
Yeah, good idea.
I can't, no. Not, yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Some people will try anything.
Hey, look, it was a shot.
So you see nothing with the library next year. Police, the continuation of the 3 squad leases. This will be the last year that we'll see light bar replacement on there. Then everything will be updated to current standards. We have a couple items in here for PC maintenance. The computer system in the PD is roughly 10 years old. It needs to be replaced. This body camera purchase in here, that's not something you'll see that was in the budget for this year as well. We hope that we'll just keep moving that along, but we want to make sure we budget it in case there's some sort of regulatory thing that comes down that we have to do. So the idea is that we probably won't need to purchase those, but we'll keep it in the budget.
For the
kinda
PC
earmarked.
maintenance, are we talking laptops here? Are we talking mini mainframes? $10,000?
Well, they have a pretty sophisticated system.
So you're
servers.
talking- With the software is what's costing.
Servers with the software,
And
with
and
the
software
computers.
agreements and things like that for the licensing.
Well, no, none of that.
That
Just,
doesn't
this
count.
is all
This
just
is all
hardware.
hardware?
Yep,
Okay.
all hardware. So the desktop computers, the servers that are down there, because they have a separate set of servers. They're all on basically a partition system from the city. They're more secure than what we have.
Their own firewall.
Yep. So yeah, it's fairly expensive. So moving on to the recreation department, we're looking at leasing fitness equipment. So that was one thing. We had $250,000 allocated for that. What we're looking at doing is a 3-year lease with a complete replacement every 3 years. And that estimate coming in with replacing our current equipment would be $70,000 a year. This is included into the rec budget. So, this is something that we're going to have a conversation about again with leasing versus buying for this type of thing.
We're gonna have a conversation about what type of equipment's gonna be replaced.
Correct. And all these items that are in the rec area, this is stuff that the RPAC will be looking at in detail. So I trust that, our council representatives will give some good insight.
Those two.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mention names, but we better Johnny.
Yep. Let's try to pick out a couple. Well, for the recreation department, there's just a sound system in the Merrick room, and that'll help with some of the fitness classes. Looking at streets and parks, you'll see a lot of things in here. And what we've done is we plugged in what we believe to be lease numbers, annual lease numbers for each of these. One of the biggest needs we have, in my opinion, is a street sweeper. That's a $250,000 new piece of equipment. The other thing is a plow truck. Right now we have 4 plow trucks. We have one in the works for being replaced this year. But our plow trucks are in major need of maintenance and repair. They're not in the best shape per se. So, and some of them are fairly old. You'll see that this is a 1995. Typically, plow truck replacements are on a 10 to 12 year replacement schedule. This is something that we're 22 years into it, so it's expected that they're not going to be in the best shape.
And this is something called the capital lease program, as we learned in the P&B, correct?
Yep, so it'll be a capital lease, and what we're looking at is we're trying to find a vendor that allows us to basically design the piece of equipment. If it's a specific piece of equipment like a plow truck, they finance it, we lease it, and at the end of the lease, we have a residual, which can be what we think it's worth at the end of the lease, or we can have it be $1, so we pay for the whole thing over the lease, the term of the lease.
And if I remember correctly, I think Zach told us that this was something that's unique to the municipal government, correct?
Correct. We can't take out, let's say, an auto loan for anything. That's not allowed. We can't incur debt in that way. So this is a way that we can basically replace equipment on a quicker schedule than coming up with $250,000 for certain pieces of equipment.
Yeah, like the plow truck.
Yeah, and we're comparing this lease model with doing what's called an equipment certificate. And what an equipment certificate is basically selling a bond or a certificate to purchase equipment. And we're looking at what the overhead is for the lease, because there's a little overhead that we have to pay for them to lease versus the overhead compared to the equipment certificate. And from my preliminary analysis, it's pretty close, and it gives us a lot more flexibility. So we're looking at a couple smaller pieces of equipment, a lawnmower, front end loader, street sweeper, and a plow truck next year, potentially if we lease. If we don't lease, there's no way we'll do all of those. We'll have to just extend some of those out a little bit further. So that's CEP, CIP. Any questions about streets and parks? Again, we'll talk more in detail about lease if that's the route that we're going to go. We're still gathering information. One last thing that I wanted to show is just our debt schedule for the levy debt that we have. So I'll kind of zoom in on this just to get a perspective of all the bonds that we have within the city and when they fall off.
General obligation.
Yep. So you'll see we have one of them falling off this year, and this is the first year is 2018 if you can't see that number. But you'll see in the next 5 or 6 years, we have quite a bit of debt falling off. That's where that bonding capacity potentially comes in, which we'll be utilizing some of that for the 112 turnback project. But as these fall off, the idea is that we will look at investing in a reconstruct project, I hope, every other year. So investing $2 to $3 million a year into our roads after the 112 turnback project. Based on our debt schedule that we have right now and our bonding capacity, I think that's doable. There's always the outside factor of the economy, house values, things like that can really slow that down.
So, question in regards to bonded debt. What's our electric number look like as far as outstanding bonded debt and also our water and sewer bonded debt? And my question, I guess, after we know that information is, what would be considered an acceptable amount of bonded debt that Sueur should have on its books at any one time?
There is no formula or model for that. It's basically what your community can afford.
Well, we're worth so much, like whatever that number is, 125 million or whatever, as a community. If we have, let's say, $30 million in bonded debt, is that acceptable? Obviously, we're doing something right because we have a good bond rating.
Yeah, I'd say what we're doing right now is perfectly fine. Cities can develop bonding policies and say we will not exceed this much bonded debt. We can do that. I don't know if we're in a position to do that. I think I'd like to just, basically, we're sitting on what we're doing right now, and then once we get into a position where we can incur debt, we'll have that conversation.
Okay.
But your question about the water fund, basically the water fund has $683,000 in bonded debt.
That's not bad.
The sewer fund has $10 million, which is associated with the wastewater treatment facility, and the electric, I believe, has $0.
So right now, we're looking at, about $19 million in bonded debt as a community.
Correct. Yeah, I'd say that number's right. So you'll look at this rec facility bond. That's basically the improvements at the ice arena and some of the other things that occurred at the community center. You'll see that's our longest term bond that we have. Doesn't fall off until 2034, and it's a pretty substantial payment. So, for example, this group that you'll see right here, this 164, that's for 2nd Street. So the 2nd Street project that we did, including the 4th Street stuff that we did the year before, is also included in this. So you can see what you get. I mean, basically 15 blocks of road for $167,000 a year. So we can get a lot of stuff done if we really manage this bonded debt well. We can get a lot of stuff done in the community.
That's the secret.
That does not include any income from the residents paying?
That does not.
Just to be clear.
Yep.
I just understand that. That's our part.
That is our part. So part of the revenues that we get are for assessments. The only thing I believe on here that we get assessments for are these two projects, so the 2017 and the 2013. So we have assessment dollars coming in for both of those. Everything else is straight general fund levy.
I have two stray questions, if I may.
Yeah.
History will haunt us. What about Technopack? I don't see any money for that. I would anticipate by next year we're going to have to do
I
something.
thought that was complete.
Well, Technopack will be complete this year.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's about 70,000 for us?
Should be.
68, I believe. Yeah.
That's close to about 70.
I know. I was
Okay.
I was trying to think about it, but they just released the purchase order to Javins. So Javins out of Mankato is doing all the work. Basically, Technopack is billing the city back, so they're managing the project, which is what we wanted. We didn't want to manage the project on their private property, and they should be doing the work this summer. Yet, because we've secured all the permits. There's a wetland permit that was required. Everything should be done by this year. So I hope that group will be happy.
Does that figure for carryover that you had coming in, is that 70 or 68,000 already out of there, or where's that going to come from?
That's coming out of the unallocated expenses line item projects. So that code that you'll see sometimes on the disbursements, that's where that's going to be planned to come out of. Now that might run that one over, but I think overall we'll still be okay.
It's just good we're going to resolve it and it won't impact us. I'm more concerned that we're going to not have it impact us in the future, and that's what I wanted. The other is, and if we're at a point where we cannot talk about this, simply say that. But with MRVPUC and Henderson, are we going to have some potential expenses paying Henderson to reorganize how MRVPUC is organized? And where will that come from?
Yep, if there is, that would come from the sewer fund. So that'll be an enterprise fund expenditure. And that would be incorporated into just basically combining the two budgets, our sewer budget and the MRVPUC budget into one. And looking at what the revenue stream would be for MRVPUC, and that's how that would be funded.
I'm a little murky on what that means. What does that mean to the resident consumer customer?
Depending on what happens, and there's nothing that has happened yet. Depending on
Understood.
what happens, the idea is that we try to make it as whatever deal is worked out, it's as revenue neutral as possible for the city. So there won't necessarily be an additional expenditure. We hope that we'll be able to basically cover the costs of anything by efficiencies gained.
Less staff would be needed.
Yeah, there'd be
And
less staff.
Less staff, understood.
That's
Yep.
right.
Yeah,
Well,
And-
less financial obligations, fiscal agent fees. We'd be able to combine general liability insurances. So there's efficiencies that have been
You're-
identified.
Instead of,
That's a good example of government working very well, and I didn't want to go where, I don't want to get to where we can't talk about something, but it's important we get a hint of that, and we look to that and support it.
well, there are certain things that we're paying double for, that we pay, the city pays for, again, a different accounting company rather than having this stuff together. It's a small amount to have it just done one way. The other thing too is just now everybody keep in mind that that the projects that we have going on, which is about $1 million worth of stuff, is already funded. So that doesn't have any impact on the city at all. That's MRPUC funds that are already sitting there. And then there would be additional funds left over that would have to be talked about and whatever, but a divide up is between the percentage rates.
I want to ask one last question, I apologize, but you talked earlier about the ponds that we have that were formerly used for wastewater processing. If we were to some way do something with those and had some income source from them, I'm assuming from some environmental fund or whatever it is, are we restricted on how that money could be used, or could we use that for roads, for example?
Those funds would not be restricted. We could use them for whatever we would want. In my mind, roads and sewer are the two highest priority items. So, in my mind, it's a wastewater structure. Wastewater bought that land. Wastewater owned and maintained it. To me, it would make sense to have it go towards the wastewater, but we could use it for whatever we wanted.
And we could name one of the new roads Wastewater Pond Road if we wanted to.
We could,
Okay.
yeah.
Just want to be sure.
Jasper, on that,
In 100.
that property is considered part of the floodplains, right?
Correct. A lot of it is in the floodplain.
Okay, so there's not much that can be done with the property to begin with, so having it be part of a DNR type based thing and sell credits, you're making money on it, so it
Yeah. So
makes a lot more sense than
Yep.
doing nothing with it. Nobody's gonna build in a floodplain.
No, and what I'm looking at, basically comparing if we sell it outright to somebody, if we hold on to it and sell an easement to somebody for something, or if we enroll it into the wetland bank program. I looked at all of those, and WSB helped me out with that, and they're doing a just tremendous job. And we're looking at it. Basically, there's a lot of administrative hoops to jump through to get into this program, but we're going through the motions. And if we can get into it, it would be great for the community. So before we get too far ahead on it, I don't want to start planning for it, because there's a very good chance that they'll just say, no, I don't think this will work. So hope it does. If it doesn't, we can always go back and we can sell the property. So wrapping things up, basically the timeline that we have moving forward is we'll have one more personnel and budget committee meeting between now and September 10th. On September 10th, we'll bring forward what I would hope to be a recommended budget. Basically, you'll see additional updated sheets as what you saw tonight with the final personnel and budget recommendations. And then what we'll do is pass a preliminary levy resolution like we did last year and every year before that. That basically sets our preliminary levy to something. And we submit that to the county, and we can't exceed that. So in October, when the county sends out their projected tax impacts, those tax impacts include what our preliminary levy is. And then in December, we'll have the opportunity to finalize our budget and really refine those numbers. So that's the timeline. I'll likely send something out to the personnel and budget to get a scheduled meeting, and we'll go from there. And that's all I have for the budget.
Regarding streets, a potential funding source could be franchise fee from our gas utility, correct? Centerpoint Energy.
So I think we should look at all the different funding mechanisms that are out there. And we could put a franchise fee on gas. There's other things. We've talked about a sales and use tax on certain things. We've talked about franchise fees. We could do it on, let's see, MVEC. So there we could try to get a franchise fee on MVEC customers. There's all kinds of different things, and what we use with that franchise fee dollars, those are unrestricted dollars, so they can go towards anything.
Okay, perfect. Anybody else have any questions for our city administrator?
Do we have a date on that next planning and personnel and budget?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
We don't know yet. I'll send an item out, and I'll send out the agenda to everybody here.
So without any further ado, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So move.
Let's not all rush to that now.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Gentlemen, thank you. I think you guys performed admirably tonight, and I think that the amount of information that
great.
was shared was wonderful. Thank you for all the hard work.
Yeah, I'll send.
I'll put it on your tab.
Yeah.
As soon as you bill.
Well, in case you haven't heard about Sueur, we don't